In a village in a fantasy world, it is said that this place hates a certain person. Many of the citizens live peacefully among themselves, and a child plays joyfully with their mother. That is until this certain person passes by with a dark energy, completely changing the atmosphere among the inhabitants. And even though he apparently poses no danger, it is common sense not to look at him. After all, this is something normal to do when talking about the corpse scraper. And in this world, a corpse scraper is definitely someone hated. Sometime later, this boy arrives at an item shop, and upon entering, scaring everyone, the shopkeeper asks what the boy wants there. Naturally, the customers start to leave, but without caring, the boy places a bag on the table and pours out what he wants to sell. For the shopkeeper, however, bringing in a load of scraps is not a good thing. Therefore, for someone like him, 3 copper coins are deemed sufficient, which is only 20% of the market price. The boy, in turn, yells that he will not accept this robbery, but the shopkeeper makes sure to remind the boy that he is nothing more than a trashy corpse scraper. In this world, there are beings that threaten the lives of humanity called monsters. And along these lines, those who make a living hunting these beasts are called adventurers. Adventurers face monsters day after day in search of high-grade materials with high rarity. By defeating their enemies, they gain levels, and even a single level difference can make a huge change in a person's power. In the end, in this world, levels are everything, and in a context where levels are a parameter of authority, our hero named Alka was someone unlucky enough to remain at level 1 for a very long time. Sometime later at a nearby market, the boy asks the baker for some bread, and with a very pleasant energy, the man hands it over, saying he had already set some aside. Even so, the moment to pay was concerning because he was already out of money again. Suddenly, the baker commented that the boy should stop being an adventurer, and with an inviting expression, he suggested that maybe there could be something better for him. However, the protagonist knows it is too late for that because he is already known as a corpse looter. From the beginning, the boy always dreamed of being an adventurer, but when he finally became one, he learned that a curse had been placed upon him. Since that time, he has been unable to gain experience, making it impossible to improve by defeating enemies. The first time the boy defeated a slime, a message appeared saying that he had failed to receive experience. Therefore, he became desperate to know how he could get stronger, but at first he decided to continue defeating monsters. Unfortunately, the messages about failing to gain experience kept appearing, and the hero, who fought believing that one day he would be able to level up, finally understood his reality and ran out of money. So eventually, without even realizing it, he ended up becoming someone who scavenged the corpses of monsters that other adventurers had killed, thus becoming part of the most miserable profession called corpse scraper. Since materials from level 1 monsters have no value, the only way to stay alive is by obtaining resources from high-level monsters. However, even while enjoying his bread, a group bumped into the boy, making his only food fall. And then one of them stepped on his food to remind the boy of his place as trash in the society they live in, which, even though was something very cruel, did not seem to be rejected by the people, to the protagonist's misfortune. The term corpse scavenger became popular in the city, and they hated Alka so much that it was difficult for him to get a normal job now. However, the fact was that he just wanted to fulfill his dream. And no matter how much others despised him, if he stopped collecting corpses, he would simply starve to death. Therefore, in the goblin's den, the hero hopes there are bodies that are worth some money. Suddenly, along the way, he smells something rotten, very different from normal. And unexpectedly, right in front of him, it turns out to be the body of a dragon. Moreover, it seems it could even be a level 200 monster. Either way, Alka thinks that this is not the time to think about that, because if it's dragon material, the price will be at least 10 times higher than the others. Obviously, the most valuable parts have already been taken, and the only thing left is the stinky pouch. This is an organ found in certain monsters that smells so bad that no one wants to open them. Suddenly, while rummaging through the pouch, the hero realizes that there is something inside, and when he cuts it open with his knife, a nearly intact full set of armor is revealed, which obviously leaves Alka very surprised by the discovery. Unexpectedly, the armor begins to emit an intimidating dark energy as he approaches. Then the protagonist understands that this is not something he can handle right now. However, a mysterious voice asks the boy to wear it, and since there is no one else around, the most logical thought is that it is coming from the armor. Whatever it is, that armor is definitely dangerous, so the boy prepares to run. However, at this moment, he has the misfortune of encountering a horde of goblins. Already very worried about the situation, the hero tries to figure out when the monsters appeared. But he soon realizes that he made a mistake by letting his guard down during the scavenging. At this moment, they are all level 1. Just like him, the hero has no proper equipment. And besides that, being outnumbered, Alka believes that he is going to be killed. Right on the first attack, a goblin manages to disarm our hero, and with a frightened expression, he understands that this is it. He looks at all the monsters in front of him, fully certain that he is going to die. And so it will be in a horrible place like this that his miserable life will come to an end. The hero's entire life flashes before his eyes at this moment, but before accepting his fate, the voice calls him again. Now the energy seems to be even stronger, and the hero understands that he will probably be devoured by the armor. However, between being devoured by goblins or taking the benefit of the doubt, he decides to accept the offer. After all, that is much better than being devoured by a horde of monsters. With his willingness to wear it confirmed, the ownership registration is completed, and the emergency installation is initiated. Therefore, even without moving, the dark energy comes toward Alka, and suddenly everything happens, leaving the monsters with a visible expression of fear on their faces. That's because the installation of the Abyss armor was successfully completed. This is the Abyss armor, so the hero asks if it is an ally, to which it replies that the owner's orders must be obeyed. In this case, Alka decides to trust its words for now. With 2 goblins approaching, the hero notices that the sword is quite sharp and similar to the one he used to wield. In the end, they are level 1 just like the protagonist, but with this sword, he can easily cut them down. And unbelievably, the monster's energy is concentrated until it leaves the lifeless body and transfers to Alka. Other goblins charge forward to try to attack our hero, but he also defeats them instantly, feeling his body become lighter. And once again, the energy of the monsters is concentrated within the protagonist's body. Definitely, his body is getting lighter to the point where it barely feels like himself anymore. With the power like this, Alka charges forward and seriously uses all his strength to defeat the remaining monsters on the battlefield in an instant. Thus, after the conflict comes the calm as he realizes the fact that he is still completely fine. For Alka, it was unbelievable to think that a level 1 could kill 5 goblins at once. But now about those mysterious lights that keep entering his body, it is said that they are power boosts. And to the hero's surprise, the message said that the levels had been absorbed, confirming an increase for Alka to level 6. Standing in front of the dragon and all the dead monsters, the system notifies that the levels have been absorbed and the owner's level confirmation as well. Then, with the adventurer's unparalleled level drain, the protagonist tries to understand the meaning of being at level 6. Alka is confused because his body was supposed to be incapable of gaining experience. However, it is explained that the owner of the Abyss armor can use the unique ability called level absorption, where the boy will be able to absorb the levels of defeated enemies, which can be seen by looking at his status as a level 6 adventurer. The protagonist's level increased, and regarding the experience, he truly absorbed the power of the monsters he defeated. This became clear the moment he remembered the energies flowing into his chest. Therefore, Alka couldn't hold back his emotions from crying at that moment. But as he wiped his tears, he focused on the blessing he had just gained, the ability to level up. The truth was that the boy had been desperate, but now his body moved much more freely. And this was only after gaining a mere 5 levels, even changing the very way he walked. However, upon realizing that he is wearing an armor that came from inside that dead dragon, the protagonist thinks that he really does stink quite a lot. But anyway, it's thanks to this armor that he was able to level up. At this moment, the hero stops because he just thought of something interesting. This is enough to make him understand this revelation is something that changes everything. The truth is that in his case, killing all the monsters on this floor might really make him even stronger. Moreover, this armor does not seem to want to harm its wearer, and if that's the case, he should take full advantage of it to exterminate all the goblins. Suddenly, one of these goblins appears to fight without even needing to be searched for. However, its shadow shows that it is not a normal one like the others, and just by sensing its presence, Alka gets scared because this is a place where there should only be weak goblins. Additionally, he gets even more frightened when he realizes that he's facing a legendary level 35 goblin. Since this is the leader of the refuge, the hero tries to understand why a superior monster exists there, and as it is so close to the entrance, the protagonist realizes that the monsters were attracted by the dragon's corpse, more precisely by the smell of rotting decomposition. As the enemy's level is 35, the armor's system states that the battle is not recommended. However, knowing that escape won't be possible, the protagonist dodges the first attack, sweating cold with worry. Next, he defends against the second, but with great difficulty, until he is thrown against a wall with force, hitting his back on the hard rocks. This is definitely the problem for Alka even now, despite being able to level up. After all, if his enemy is this one, he will die as a weakling just the same. Alka screams in frustration because for a moment, he thought he had become strong. But the reality was that the boy was still just as pathetic as before. Somehow, the protagonist manages to escape through an alley and now tries to think of an escape route out of the cave. The nearest exit is blocked by the legendary goblin and his subordinates. So Alka starts to believe that the weak should act like the weak and simply hide until the storm passes. Even though this is his plan, a level 1 goblin appears in front of him, and so it charges like crazy to attack our hero. But since it is nothing like its leader, Alka simply grabs the monster by the head and smashes it against the wall. In this world, levels are absolute, so even monsters must understand the difference in power and flee when necessary. With one more victory, the owner of the armor receives a level increase, going to level 7. For some reason, Alka had forgotten that he could now advance easily and perhaps defeat the leader. A few minutes ago, he was close to being killed, but now the hero understands that he has the chance to destroy his enemies to survive. Because of this, avoiding the main route, the hero defeats several smaller goblins along the way, and continues doing the work of cleaning the dungeon at every opportunity he gets, until the levels from the bodies start transferring to Alka. Then the hero's logic about the strongest winning due to the difference in levels becomes increasingly real. This is a world where the weak are oppressed, just as Alka was in the recent past. After some time fighting in the dungeon, the protagonist manages to reach level 15. And at a certain moment while walking, the system recommended that Alka explore a cave just ahead. Because of this, the hero went there, and just as he entered, he found a pile of gold like no other. To justify this, Alka believes it must be all the treasure from adventurers who were defeated by the goblins. And since he is already there, the hero believes he should find something valuable to take. Suddenly, a chest catches his attention, and upon looking more closely, the contents are even more impressive, especially because it seems to be filled with health recovery potions. In this case, the hero decides to take them with him in case he needs them during a battle. And about this, the armor responds by saying it understands and confirms that storage has been expanded to hold them. So before Alka could even understand what it meant, a light appeared on the lower part of the armor, creating spaces for vials. And since it is something very useful, the protagonist thanks the system for its proactivity. Obviously, our hero would also like to take the gold with him. Something like that would only get in the way during battle. For now, Alka's top priority is to escape from there safely. Moreover, the hero has definitely become stronger, and if he gets out successfully, he can live a decent life just by selling monster materials. Because of that, he decides to leave, but suddenly some noises catch his attention. Since they sound very much like voices, the protagonist feels both scared and curious. But more concerned than anything else, he runs toward a box until he notices that behind it, there was a human girl captured by the monsters. And obviously, since she was crying desperately, the protagonist didn't think twice before rushing to her rescue, untying the ropes that held her. It was a relief for both of them that Alka noticed the noises, and having been saved, the girl from the village of Rakel, named Mill, thanks him from the bottom of her heart. Not wanting to be rude, the girl asks if she can know the name of her savior. Then, after thinking about it for a moment, the hero replies that his name is Alka. and he immediately clarifies that yes, it is the name of the infamous corpse looter known in the city. Mill, in turn, had heard rumors that the protagonist was a terrible person. However, she is also happy to realize that he is nothing like the rumors. After all, in the end, it was he who saved her from suffering a cruel fate in that cave. So she truly doesn't think of Alka as a trash corpse scraper, but rather as her dear savior. All this time, Alka wanted to be an adventurer who helped people. Therefore, he calls the girl to follow him and tells her that he will take full responsibility for bringing her back to the village. Moreover, he makes it clear that there is nothing wrong because what was actually in Alka's heart was a little bit of happiness. On the way, the protagonist notices something different, so he asks Mill to stay behind the rocks for a moment. This is the feeling of being near goblins, and looking closer, Alka realizes that it's not just one or two, but an entire horde. There might possibly be around 20 of them in total, but since they are all level 1 while the hero is at level 15, in this case, it doesn't matter how many there are now because Alka is determined to turn all of them into power for himself. Quickly, the monsters run toward the protagonist, but he finishes them all with his sword, and without any mercy, he rushes at the last ones remaining, sending them to the same fate. Thus, the levels are absorbed once again successfully. Thanks to the level drain ability, the protagonist's attacks are getting increasingly powerful. That's why after dodging the attack of one goblin, the others coming from behind weren't even able to touch Alka. Because with a jump, he managed to move several meters away and use the height as an advantage to attack them, absorbing their levels as well. Apparently, the protagonist even starts to enjoy the monster hunt, and the frightened expressions they make don't change anything when it comes to cutting them down. Even with several monsters defeated, the goblins keep trying to kill the protagonist at any cost. However, just as he did with their comrades, he charges forward and cuts them all down with his sword. Then, after all that sea of destruction, the system notifies that a level increase has been detected, and now the power of the armor's wielder is at level 35. Mill gets very scared by all this and asks if they can leave now, but the protagonist replies that they cannot yet. After all, with the amount of blood spilled, others must have already been attracted. And among them, obviously, the strongest of them is coming. The same legendary goblin from before, whom Alka will now face in a rematch. Standing in front of the monster, the protagonist comments that he already knew it would come, and the legendary goblin roars, displaying its imposing presence. Both the protagonist and the monster are currently at level 35, so he is no longer the same weakling who ran from the fight before. Without hesitation, the goblin boss shows that it will attack with full force. Then the protagonist replies, saying that if it thinks it can defeat him so easily, it is making a terrible mistake. Thus, the boy manages to land a slash on the monster's abdomen, making it fall to its knees. And while he is surrounded by the subordinates, he notices that there are about 10 of them in total. As long as the legendary goblin is still alive, the protagonist believes he cannot waste his time fighting these minions. So he shouts to the girl he saved to throw him a knife, and not knowing which one, Nil simply tosses an entire bundle into the air. Naturally, they fall from the holder in the direction of our hero. Before that, she apologizes a lot, but the protagonist comments that it's all right. After all, with his reaction time, he manages to catch two and fight the monsters with ease. In addition, he grabs others as they fall from the air and quickly throws them at the monsters. Several times, the protagonist's strategy continues to be collecting knives and throwing them. Then, with several of them in hand, he comments that it must really be misfortune. But he thanks all those who tried to save the boss. After all, now the legendary goblin will suffer because of the level difference between them, since our hero defeats all these small monsters and manages to ascend to level 45. Already somewhat recovered from the previous attack, the monster screams and tries to attack Alka from behind. But now it is no longer possible to deal damage. At least that's what the hero thought, because by blocking carelessly, he was nearly cut. He can't understand how this is happening, but is still being pressured. And apparently the monster is not even slightly weakened from the last injury. From what he can see, the hero realizes that the legendary goblin is equipped with a bracelet that increases strength. This is an enchanted item, and from a distance, it is possible to see the energy it emits. Normally, levels do not increase so easily, and that's why adventurers generally equip themselves with enchanted items to boost combat power as much as possible. However, the boy never expected the monster to also be using something like this. But since that is the case, the result will still be simple, because all he has to do is destroy the bracelet first. Without wasting time, our hero dodges an attack, and even though he doesn't believe it will be easy, he focuses, because from this point on, he will no longer hold back but go all in. Furthermore, he will make sure that the power of the strongest will exterminate this monster. The weapons of both clash and attack, but the protagonist insists on applying pressure, which the monster feels as it has to brace itself against the ground. Even so, it manages to retaliate with a sideways strike that sends the hero flying. Naturally, Alka feels a bit frustrated, but remembers the knives he used to defeat the smaller ones, and he quickly collects them back to use against the big guy, who defends himself with the giant cleaver. Even so, he decides to throw another, which makes the monster defend itself a second time. But now that it was distracted, the hero took the opportunity to get close to its face. And even though the goblin's reaction time was high, the hero managed to use the weapon as a boost to reach its flanks with one of those throwing knives, thus finally achieving the goal he had from the beginning, which was actually the bracelet. Therefore, at the moment the enhancement item falls broken to the ground, the hero faces the monster directly. And demonstrating his superiority, he declares that it's time to fish for the small fry. Regarding that legendary goblin, when the boy first entered the lair, he was weak and intimidated. But now the power difference between the two is completely reversed. Therefore, the protagonist comments that it's his turn to intimidate and asks if the monster is ready. Without any different reaction, the monster simply roars, so the protagonist charges forward at high speed and attacks the goblin's defenses, making the defense completely useless because now it is the monster who is thrown against the wall, creating several injuries. With that, the protagonist slowly approaches, asking what it feels like to be weak, and he attacks with several slashes, telling the monster not to hold a grudge because he's just trying to survive. Finally, the hero manages to disarm the goblin, and by defeating this enemy who was initially so strong, all those comments about the protagonist being a corpse looter will be thrown into the void along with his weak self. Even unarmed, the monster tries to attack with its fist, but the punch goes directly into the hero's sword, ending the situation in an instant. And since it was because of him that the boy became stronger, he even thanked it. From that body, several lights entered the protagonist's armor, and this time the owner's power increase was confirmed to the incredible level 80. With nothing left to fear, Alka tells Mill that she can come out now, and even she's impressed by the hero's feat. After all, now he will be unbeatable in this place. But for some reason, the hero does not feel excited. Either way, he extracts the rare material from the legendary goblin, which is its tusk. Alka never thought he would see the day when he could obtain such a good piece. Mel simply asked him to let her store it along with the other things, because in that little bag were all the coins that could fit along with fragments of other rare items. Alka apologizes for making her carry so many materials, but the girl shows that she doesn't mind at all. Anyway, she asks what they will do now since they have already collected all the items. However, since the hero doesn't need to rush back to the village anymore, Alka thinks that if he leaves the goblins alone, they might kidnap another citizen. Therefore, the protagonist asks if the girl can come with him to a more distant place. And to explain himself, he says that he wants to make sure the monsters don't kidnap anyone else. Now, for some time, the protagonist's goal was to hunt every goblin in this cave. Finally, after some time, they return to the village, and since Alka has already reached level 100, he even feels a bit concerned. But at level 100, it's a fact that he should be able to defeat most of the monsters there. Therefore, the hero can finally consider himself a true adventurer. Mill, in turn, asks what the boy means because she has never heard of an adventurer with 3 digits in this village. Therefore, Alka is no longer just one of the adventurers, but the best that exists there. Alka, for his part, seems not to believe it, but since he has fought only to survive, he never looked at the others. Absorbing the levels of defeated enemies was something that surprised Mill at first, but with that, she is sure he will become even stronger. So she also says that she will be cheering for the boy. Thus, the two talk peacefully until a group of adventurers appears, greeting the corpse scraper with hostility. And Alka knows very well Jurek, who is the one leading the group. Obviously, the white-haired one asks what that black armor is, and everyone starts laughing, thinking that Alka decided to buy armor to compensate for not being able to level up. Anyway, Jurek warns that using a fancy item won't make any difference. After all, level 1 can't compensate for the lack of power with something like that. However, just as he was speaking, the hero told the guy to shut up and instantly appeared with a knife, saying he was already tired. Therefore, with a terrifying expression, he politely asked once again. Faced with this threat, Juri feels intimidated, but remembering who he is dealing with, gets angry and delivers a kick that sends the protagonist backward. After all, to him, Alka was just a simple corpse looter who shouldn't speak so boldly. However, the moment he tried to attack more aggressively, the hero responded by putting him on the ground. And with his companions trembling in fear, the hero asked who would be next, and obviously, no one said a word. Juri really can't understand what is happening since a level 20 should lose to a level 1. But about that, the hero comments that the guy doesn't even have a quarter of his power. Quickly, everyone opens the system to check the true level of the corpse scraper. Then the adventurers are shocked because even though it seems impossible, it is true. It was true that the protagonist was at level 100, and to everyone, he should also be considered a monster. Alka, for his part, finds it ironic that he is being called a monster after being called a trash picker. However, he warns that he only wants to be a normal adventurer, but his warning goes unheard. Because the moment they saw Alka's true power, the group quickly ran away. But that was something obvious to Mill since the hero was no longer the same person as before. That's why, with a smile, she asks him to have more confidence in himself. And soon she calls the boy to share this news with all the people in the city. A little while later, at the material shop, the old man asks aggressively what the boy wants. So as always, the protagonist says he wants to sell, but since he is considered a corpse looter, the old man says it doesn't matter how well it's presented because the material is trash. However, about that, our hero had his trump card because he asked if what he brought was also trash. And upon showing it, even that rude vendor was surprised because it was a legendary goblin tusk. Since this is a rare material, the vendor asks where the boy got it, and he replies that he defeated the monster, but the old man doesn't believe it. In this case, Alka calls Mill, who dumps everything they got from the last expedition onto the table. And faced with that, the hero asks if the old man is going to buy or not. After all, now he doesn't mind going to sell somewhere else. Obviously, even being rude, the old man recognizes quality items and agrees to buy everything. Then with a fake smile, the hero asks him to pay a fair price. Later, at the city food market, the protagonist goes to the baker's stall. And because he was someone who always treated him well, he hands over a bag full of gold, leaving the old man completely confused. Alka explains that he finally managed to defeat a strong monster, and that he's very happy he didn't give up. So the old man doesn't think twice before hugging the boy, also saying that he is very happy that he didn't give up. Suddenly, a very loud commotion is heard at the entrance of the village, so the hero says he will finish the conversation later. Right at the city gates, a group of white werewolves is destroying everything, and among them, one prepares to make a girl his afternoon snack. But at the most critical moment, the protagonist appears, saving the girl, who luckily ends up safe. Alka, for his part, finds the monster's behavior in front of him very strange. But anyway, he says that if the werewolves are trying to attack the village, they arrived a day late. After all, as long as the hero is there, none of them will get past the gates. These monsters are all level 8 werewolves and normally would have been killed before even getting close to the village. But since Jareed and the others who were assigned to deal with them ran away, the protagonist now understands the situation. And he also understands that this now makes him responsible to act. Quickly, one of the werewolves tries to attack the boy, but the protagonist dodges because with the power he has now, he can take down as many as he wants. The worrying part, however, is that not all of them are focusing on him, but rather on the citizens, whom the boy isn't able to protect all at once. And obviously, if he doesn't do something about it, the innocent population will be killed. One of the civilians becomes desperate because he is just one step away from being eaten alive. But at this moment, the protagonist appears, shielding him with his own body and finishing off the beast. Then the boy asks if the man is hurt, but after saying yes, a citizen realizes that it's the corpse scraper who's there. However, instead of getting angry, the hero simply goes on to handle the situation, which is more important. Deep down, he knows he is still the corpse scraper that everyone hates, but that is definitely no reason to abandon others. Naturally, while the protagonist does his job, everyone notices that Alka is saving the population. And finally advancing toward the last monster, after finishing it, the hero knows everything will be over. So with just one strike, he finishes the last of the opponents. And thus, with the power-absorbing ability, the armor owner's level rises all the way to 172. However, the fact that it only increased by 72 is concerning for the hero since he counted 10 werewolves. Following this logic, if he had finished all of them, his level should have gone up by 80. Therefore, this means there is still one more hiding somewhere. From the top of a house, the last of the monsters is ready to attack a little girl. So the moment Alka realizes this, the monster simply ignores him, jumping on top of its target. Alka panics because even after increasing his level so much, he still might not be able to save a life. And that's what is about to happen when the girl looks up and sees the werewolf just a few meters from her. Alka, for his part, refuses to accept this and thinks that maybe he can make it if he throws his sword, but he only has one chance. Even so, he will make this the best throw possible because he has to guarantee that he hits the target. The monster charges at high speed toward the girl, and the protagonist's sword approaches the werewolf's body, until Alka manages to hit the beast and send it flying away from the girl with the impact. This way, the little girl also realizes that she is in front of the corpse scraper. But since he confirms that he saved her, the girl throws away all prejudice to thank him, even making our hero happy for helping her. However, now the pleasant atmosphere fades because, with the end of the invasion, several citizens start to approach. And among them, one in particular says he needs to have a conversation with Alka. At that very moment, the protagonist thinks it's going to be a headache dealing with citizens who are upset about being saved by him. So just as another person approaches to speak as well, the hero says he's going to leave since he's not welcome there. However, unexpectedly, these people ask him to wait a moment, and what they came to say to him was simply thank you, since thanks to him, everyone there was safe. The boy from earlier assumed the protagonist thought he was being dramatic, but since Alka put his own body at risk for him, he says that he appreciated it, which surprises the protagonist. In addition, the mother of that little girl also approaches, and since her daughter was rescued, she lowers her head to thank him in submission. In this case, the protagonist becomes very embarrassed and asks the mother to stand up. Then he explains that the only reason that led him to do this was his desire to save everyone. The hero understands that his past as a corpse looter will not disappear. However, now that he has the power to protect others, Alka states that he will become an adventurer who helps people. Moreover, the boy smiles, saying that it will be good if they keep an eye on him because for now, that is all he asks. That day, the protagonist was nothing more than a simple corpse scraper, but in the end, he became the adventurer who saved the village. The next day, everyone walks normally in that small town, and upon finding our protagonist, Mel happily goes to him. Because of that, Alka welcomes her, but the girl finds it strange that the boy is not wearing armor. But about that, the hero simply snaps his fingers because he has just discovered that he can put it on and take it off instantly, and the girl finds it quite amazing. Thanks to this armor, the protagonist states that he will become a great adventurer, so he was also very lucky to have found it in the goblin's nest. Even so, he still wonders why there was a dead dragon in that place, although for now, it is not something that matters. Elsewhere, someone shouts for them to run quickly. The place where they are is the goblin's nest near the body of the dragon that was being talked about. Jareed yells for everyone to get away from that thing right now, and his teammates run as fast as they can. However, in an instant, a puddle of blood makes the fate of the two very clear. Desperate to know what is happening, the leader of the group shouts, asking the identity of the being in front of him. However, Jayanai stares at him without revealing anything and soon begins to generate a powerful electric current. Then the adventurer laughs in despair, understanding that this will also be his end. And the moment the energy beam is ready, this mysterious monster fires it with full force without any mercy, which even makes our hero hear it from afar and wonder if he is imagining things. Some time ago, Jareed's group was chasing a one-eyed troll, and since the monster was already injured, the leader ordered his companions not to let it escape. Obviously, realizing it was a good opportunity, the two agreed. At a certain point in the chase, the monster ran into the goblin's cave. Then Jareed starts commenting that because they abandoned the mission to stop the werewolves, they received a very high fine. And that is precisely why they cannot let such a profitable prey get away. As the monster drags itself inside, trembling with exhaustion, it suddenly smells something that attracts it to the center of the cave. And upon arriving there, it was drawn by the smell of the dragon's decomposing body. But for some reason, this was not a foul smell to it like it was to others, but rather a delicious one. Together with his group shortly after, Jareed comments that it must be just ahead until suddenly he is surprised by something. The smell of the dragon's decomposition is something that almost makes everyone there vomit. But something else catches the attention of the white-haired man more than that? After all, in the center of the dragon's body is the troll they were chasing, devouring all the flesh like an animal. And the worst part is that the second man in the group notices that something is strange. After all, suddenly something comes out from inside the monster, making Jarig realize that the situation will not be good at all. While chasing that sound from before, the protagonist realizes that he was indeed right, and that it was not just his imagination, because there really is a strange sensation in the air. And this entire sensation seems to be coming precisely from this place. At this moment, our hero hears another noise even louder than the last, which makes him become very serious. Inside the cave, the smell of rot only gets worse, and further ahead, he finds the dragon's body. However, upon arriving at the place where he got the armor, the scene was of a transformed troll exterminating Jarig's group. And right after noticing a new guest, it sent away the companion of the white-haired boy to focus entirely on the protagonist's appearance. Even Alka is startled by the presence of the monster because it is different from anything he has ever faced. Even so, since he is at level 180 now, he believes there is no way he can lose. So before making any move, he will defeat it with a single precise attack. However, the armor warns that due to the level difference with the enemy monsters, the battle is strongly discouraged, making Alka stop for a moment, which is enough for the monster to see an opening and attack. At this moment, all the armor recommends is an immediate dodge, but the protagonist had already taken a very powerful hit, which threw him to the ground, making him fall face down with many injuries. To be sure of the enemy he is facing, the protagonist decides to check the monster's status. And the moment he did that, the system's prediction proved to be true because this was a fallen variant of level 200. Quickly, the armor warns that a strong energy condensation has been detected coming from the troll's head. Therefore, an immediate dodge is recommended, but our hero cannot move. Little by little, the messages are repeated several times as the monster's attack gets closer to being launched. Then Alka tries to move using all his strength because if he does nothing at this moment, he will definitely be the next to be killed by this abomination. The estimated time before the attack is 10 seconds, and since the boy cannot move, he ends up thinking about the worst possibility. Even so, he struggles to kneel using his sword as support, and with almost 1 second left, Alka manages to almost stand up. Either way, the monster does not wait for him to get up to fire its energy attack. Because of that, the protagonist is thrown against the wall and the injuries he suffers practically leave him unconscious. Luckily for him, after seeing the boy defeated on the ground, the monster decides to leave. Then, sometime later, Alka manages to recover, questioning what the hell happened. The armor warns that it is possible that the owner was considered deceased, so Alka is very grateful to fate. Obviously, it is a fact that he has severe damage to his body, so the use of potions is strongly recommended. Remembering the potions he took from the goblins, the boy drinks the first one, and since the effect already allows him to move, Alka comments that he should thank them. Anyway, now he needs to chase the monster as quickly as possible since he is sure that its next target is Reykjavik Village. However, before going, a voice calling him a corpse scavenger reaches his ears, and looking more closely, it is Jarig, who even in an extremely bad condition, is still alive. Without any shame, the boy demands the recovery potions. After all, he believes that something like this won't make any difference to trash like him. Proving to be even worse than expected, the boy warns that he will run away as soon as he drinks them, using the village as bait. Therefore, once again, even more irritated than before, he shouts to get the potions quickly. Jarig coughs up blood and insists because his entire body is injured and his mind is going insane. Unexpectedly, the boy considers doing this, but first asks the Abyss armor if it will make any difference. The system informs that the injuries are fatal and that inevitably the boy will die after a few more minutes of intense pain. In this case, upon understanding, the hero asks for one more thing before anything else. What he wants to know is whether the level drain can be used to absorb levels from a human being. And as the system informs that yes, it can, Alka empathetically says that the boy can no longer be saved. And deep down, he already knew that, but just wanted to escape from this pain by creating a comfortable illusion. Alka, in turn, comments that there is one thing he can do to free him from this pain. And Jarig also already knows what he wants to do, so he simply asks to be killed right away without any regret. At this moment, Alka admits that he never liked the guy, but he also finds it sad to have to say goodbye like this. Either way, he really does what he made clear he was going to do, and by absorbing Jarig's powers, our hero reaches level 200. Sometime later, the monster approaches through the forest until it manages to spot the beginning of the village. Obviously, it is guided by the instinct that there are humans there, but it is at this moment that the protagonist encounters the beast, and he appears delivering a slash to its arm that causes intense pain. Wasting no time, our hero advances at his maximum speed, and without wanting to offend, states that he can no longer keep losing to it. Because of that, he attacks again, but now the monster defends itself cleverly. Either way, with his sword pointed at the beast, Alka warns that next time the troll should make sure to eliminate his enemy. After all, since he didn't do it now, the level of the two is equivalent, and without wanting to drag it out any longer, Alka calls him to fight right away. First of all, our hero also advises him to stay alert. After all, even though he didn't like Jarig, he still had to kill someone he knew with his own hands, so he has never been this angry in his life. Wasting no time, the monster moves in for the first attack, and confident that it will win, tries to strike from below. However, our hero uses the monster's shoulder as support to climb to a higher position, and thus lands a hit on the monster's back before it can defend itself. Even though his strategy was successful, the wing is more resistant than expected. Suddenly, the monster starts to concentrate energy around its eye, so now the hero wouldn't let it do that again. But, demonstrating enormous intelligence, this was just a feat by the beast, which used the hero's voluntary approach to land a kick. And taking advantage of the moment when he was most defenseless, the monster used an entire tree as a weapon to strike the protagonist, causing him to be thrown very far, breaking several trees along the way until he ended up pinned against a rock wall. Even though the level difference has disappeared, they are still evenly matched, which means the boy has no advantage. Furthermore, the monster has also been using feints the entire time, but now Alka takes another potion, which is his biggest advantage. This way, he becomes furious, saying that it's not over yet, and charges toward the monster's energy beam that is starting to be prepared. Unfortunately, upon getting close, the system warns that this is something that cannot be stopped. So changing strategies, the protagonist dodges at the last second and charges with his sword with all his strength. Then, even though the troll tried to use its hard wings as a shield, Alka's enraged strike was enough to practically cut both of them in half. With the monster completely distracted by the damage caused, the hero realizes that he finally made some progress. However, suddenly the beast's attention turns to somewhere other than the hero, and as the reflection of the village becomes clear in the troll's eye, our hero becomes very worried, but the monster simply puts strength into its legs and launches into the air toward the place with the highest concentration of humans. Since it happened very quickly, the protagonist couldn't react instantly. But since the monster's objective was clearly to attack the village, the boy hurried as fast as he could, understanding that he needed to chase it before an even greater disaster could happen. In an instant, the silhouette of the monster can be seen above the citizens of the entire village. And before they could even understand what it was, an explosion happened, leaving everyone scared. And from that explosion emerged the fallen variant, which roared in a demonstration of dominance. Alka continues the pursuit but gets very scared when he realizes that it has already entered the village. Following its nature, the monster starts destroying everything it sees in front of it. All the citizens try to run for their lives, begging for help, and once again the troll charges its energy beam, which makes the protagonist think this must be a joke. Unfortunately, the inevitable happens and the energy beam passes through, destroying several houses in an instant. Then the protagonist approaches from a rooftop and charges toward the monster with indescribable rage. The beast defends itself using its arm to protect its eye and once again tries to ignore its opponent. However, the hero wouldn't let something like that happen, so he jumps over, blocking the escape route, attacking the fallen variant's defenses again. For a few seconds, the two struggle between attack and defense, but the protagonist dodges. Still, he prepares another strike, warning that it's not over because he needs to protect the village at all costs. Using all the power it has, the troll charges energy in its eye and fires the energy beam once again with even more speed. This way, giving no chance for defense, it also grabs the protagonist in the air, punching him from above downward, causing Alka to crash into the village ground with an explosion. Thus, the monster is finally free to start running again, but the hero refuses to be defeated like this. Since he is the only adventurer with a high enough level to fight the monster, he forces himself to stand. And with a serious expression, he commits to dealing with this problem once and for all. Sometime later, that baker has the bad luck of encountering the variant, but is not scared by its presence, even though the monster tries to intimidate him with roars. In the end, since this is a small village, even if he runs, the old man knows he will be caught. Therefore, he prefers to just wait there until some hero arrives to save him. And since he was sure of that, his faith did not disappoint him because the protagonist managed to arrive before a disaster happened. With a playful smile, Alka comments that he is way too clumsy to be that so-called hero. However, since the boy came to his rescue, that is exactly what matters. Still, Alka makes it clear that he doesn't know if he can defeat the monster, although it is a fact that now both are at the same level. In this case, the baker goes to a box and asks the boy not to be so pessimistic. Then he throws a piece of bread to the boy, saying it's a gift. And looking closer, it's clear that this is the last piece of bread from when the boy was still a corpse scavenger. The old man comments that compared to those days, this situation certainly isn't that bad. Then the boy eats it and makes it clear that the bread is terrible. But since this really was a motivation, it filled him with courage. The hero points his sword at the monster, asking it to get ready because they will continue the fight immediately. This time, it is our hero who approaches first, and using a feint, he pretends he will focus on the eye to create an opening at the arm. However, the monster manages to grab the hero with its other hand to his surprise. And without thinking twice, the beast throws the boy far away, sending him over the houses until he lands on the ground. In this case, Alka becomes desperate, trying to figure out how he can hurt it. But then he hears a noise from a frightened person and turning around, realizes there's a small child nearby. Alka immediately shouts for the little one to run away as fast as possible. However, since the child is having a panic attack, he can't move. And to make the situation worse, instinctively, the monster focuses its attention on the weakest human. In just a second, it jumps toward the child and with an intimidating roar, prepares an attack that approaches in a terrifying way. However, at the last second, the protagonist appears, taking the attack head-on for the child, who, although scared, manages to escape the impact. Unfortunately, that's not the case for the protagonist, since even his defense isn't enough. Once again, Alka begs the child to run, now with even more sincerity since he can't continue. Thus, while the monster prepares the final blow, the hero asks the child to show a little courage. And even though his whole body is trembling, the boy stands up, saying that he will try and runs with all his strength without looking back, leaving the protagonist alone with the monster, who now feels satisfied. The system warns that the enemy has completed charging its energy, so an immediate retreat from the area is recommended. But the hero apologizes to the Abyss armor because this time you won't be able to do what's recommended. Without any delay, the laser fires from the monster's eye and hits the protagonist, piercing houses and everything in its path. In the end, the hero remained intact since he defended himself with his sword, but that power was overwhelming. Even though they are at the same level, the difference in skill is way too big, and because of the heavy damage, the hero decides to take a potion. But unfortunately, he realizes that he dropped it when he was thrown against the houses. In this case, obviously, he needs to go after it, but gradually the hero's strength starts to fade, until the boy finds himself in an abyss, realizing that he failed to protect the village. Even so, something inside him still believes in the hope of recovering and continuing to fight. Therefore, Alka desperately begs in his mind for someone to offer help. And as a result of his prayers, suddenly the last potion is poured into his mouth. Then when the boy wakes up, he notices the presence of a girl right in front of him. Because of that, the protagonist quickly gets up, asking who this person is. And without hiding anything, the girl introduces herself as Leela, who is just a girl from the village that wants to protect the place where she was raised and that she loves so much. Cutting off the pleasant conversation between the two, a terrifying noise from the monster makes the hero realize that he needs to get back to the fight quickly. But before that, she comments that she has been watching the hero fighting to protect the village for some time, and knowing that he still cares about this place is something that makes her very happy. However, she extends her hand saying that for now, they should run away together. Obviously, the hero refuses that possibility since he is the only one there who can defeat the monster. However, in response, the girl says that there is a reason to run because if he is defeated there, she is sure that there will be no one left to be saved throughout the entire village. Even with the destruction happening, Leela states that as long as the hero's wound is not healed, he should avoid fighting that monster. And even though he doesn't want to accept it, Alpha understands that she is right and that it will take some time before he can fight with full strength. Suddenly, from high up in the sky, the monster they were talking about appears to confront the two head-on. Then quickly, the girl extends her hand to the protagonist, who, seeing no other option, decides to retreat with her to a safe position until he's fully recovered. During the escape, they turn into an alley, and by the way, the hero asks how she knows his name. Then, still running, the girl explains that Alka is quite famous in this place. He asks if it's for being that corpse scavenger, and indeed, that is one of the reasons. However, Leela makes it clear that another reason for knowing him is because she considers him a hero. Leela explains that she was there the day the werewolves attacked the village, and that is precisely why she believes in the protagonist's ability. So in case the situation is in the hero's hands, she is sure he will solve it. Faced with that hopeful look from the girl, Alka raises his fist and decides to make a promise that he will save the village, which was exactly what Leela wanted to hear. Suddenly, another strange sound catches their attention because it is a human scream. When they go to the place, a bandit was kidnapping a girl and forcibly taking her out of the city. In addition, the same man was feeling grateful to the monster since there was no one to stop them from doing whatever they wanted openly, making this a great opportunity to make money. Obviously, the protagonist watches this whole scene with disgust at the opportunists taking advantage to get what they want. Leela has the same reaction, but suddenly something surprises her, and right when the hero tries to talk to her, he also realizes that even though they were hiding, a man saw her from behind and captured her, turning the girl who had just been saved by our hero into a hostage of the bandits. With a very serious tone, the bald man explains that if the boy wants the girl safe, he must follow his orders. The first one is to go near the carriage right ahead, which the hero accepts. When he is kicked over there, the leader of the bandits gets confused about the situation. After all, he had already said that they didn't need a man, but he soon realized that there was also a pretty girl being held. And upon looking more closely at every part of her body, he smiled maliciously because he knew she would definitely be worth a lot of money. Faced with that disgusting attitude, the protagonist asks whether the leader has no conscience at times like this. But about that, the bandit doesn't even think twice before saying he doesn't. The fact is that they came there to loot this village in the first place. Therefore, the bandit makes it clear that the hero is already lucky that they weren't the ones who had to kill the citizens, which obviously makes the protagonist furious, wanting to finish off this trash as soon as possible. The leader in turn notices this angry expression and gets closer, asking if he is an adventurer. Then he whispers in Alka's ear that it must be shameful for him, because now it doesn't matter how powerful he is since he can't do anything. Either way, everyone gets ready to leave, and the leader asks the bald guy to take good care of the girl. After all, it will be a problem if the adventurer tries to intervene in any way. Alda heard this whole conversation knowing that he only needed one moment of carelessness. Therefore, he waited for an opportunity to save her, until suddenly a certain person with a knife appeared behind the kidnapper. Quickly, the bandit warns his partner to dodge, and then it is revealed that the person is actually Mill. Therefore, since the bald guy was warned in advance, he managed to dodge easily without letting go of the hostage, causing the girl to fall face down on the ground. The bald guy comments that the girl can't beat him and that she should know the difference in their strength. However, unexpectedly, she says that it's okay, leaving the kidnapper confused. That's because right behind him, there is already another person to take care of this. In just an instant, Alka approaches, and this time, before the big guy can react, he receives a punch with all the power of the adventurer. This way, not only is the bald guy defeated, but Leela is also freed, falling directly into the arms of the protagonist. Faced with this, the leader of the bandits tells his subordinates to approach quickly, and yells at them to kill the hero before he interferes any further, so they all gather around the boy. First of all, the bandit asks Alka if he's sure about this action because he won't hold back. And since the boy doesn't answer, the gunslinger interprets it as if our hero is feeling afraid. With nothing else to say, while Alka remains unresponsive, the bandits jump on him to finish him off. Then the protagonist remembered what the bald guy had said earlier before being defeated. He made it clear that understanding the difference in power was essential to knowing whether it was worth getting into a fight. Therefore, it was ironic that the bandit leader didn't follow this now, since he was picking a fight with someone he couldn't defeat. Naturally, after that statement came a mass-level absorption by the protagonist, and when only the leader was left among the bandits, he became desperate because this was not the speed of a normal adventurer. Then the protagonist made sure to confirm, especially since he was already at level 200. In this case, in a last instinct to fight, the bandit draws his sword and charges aggressively. But obviously, the protagonist finishes him off with just one strike of his sword. Thus, once again, the powers are absorbed, and now the owner of the armor reaches level 250, which also leads the system to notify that the maximum level for a human being has been reached. After defeating the bandit, the protagonist thinks about what he just heard. Then he asks if that means level 250 is the highest he can reach, and the system confirms. To begin with, the hero had never heard of an adventurer with such high levels, but he also didn't think there could be a limit. Either way, now that everything is resolved, Leela jumps on her savior, thanking him for saving her. But the hero makes a point of not taking credit, because to him, it's the least he could do after the potion earlier, since if he hadn't taken that in time, he certainly wouldn't be alive anymore. Still, Whatever the reason, Leela remains happy because to her, Alka is her hero. Faced with that attention and with all the bandits' bodies on the ground, Alka doesn't accept that title because he still thinks he's immature. If he had left the bandits alive, they would have attacked another village, so Alka stated he used the sword because he couldn't find a better solution. But in response to that, Leela comments that he isn't wrong, and when asked what she means, she repeats it with more intensity. For her, it is only because of the protagonist's use of the sword that everyone is still alive. Therefore, she asks him to have more pride in himself, and with an affectionate expression, she says she won't let Alka belittle himself. Then, and after hearing everything, the protagonist thanks her, saying it's a relief to know that, which finally restores his confidence. At that moment, Mill appears, saying that she has already evacuated all the people who were trapped, so she receives a pat as a reward for her good work, which makes her very happy. She was really happy to be able to help because leaving everything to Alka while just watching wasn't something she could do. Therefore, now she calls the hero and asks to fight alongside him until the end. But now that he has already eliminated the bandits, the protagonist says it won't be necessary, to her surprise. A few seconds later, while the monster continued destroying everything, the protagonist asks them to get as far away as possible, especially since now at level 250, the system warns that the bearer can easily dominate the enemy monster. And after strengthening himself so much, the protagonist is now ready to return to the battle. Without even needing to run to the place the monster they were talking about appears, falling from the sky. And from atop the walls, just its arrival is enough to raise a powerful gust of wind, which, although it affects the girls, doesn't affect the protagonist. Either way, he says he's ready and then asks once again for the two of them to run because he's going to end this now. So the girls accept and run away holding hands at the same time. Now alone with the monster, the protagonist apologizes for running away from it earlier, but says he won't run anymore because it's time to finish this duel. The variant roars to impose its dominance, but now the protagonist doesn't even move a finger out of place, he charges forward instead. In the beginning, he couldn't even wield a sword because of his poor conditions. Then he managed to hold a real one in a very good condition and eventually started using it to protect the people around him. Now in this moment, the protagonist remembers the fight against the wolves and also remembers when he had to kill Jarig, as well as the reaction of all the people in the village who were waiting to be saved while fighting for their own lives. Therefore, Alka says that it's time to fulfill everyone's wishes by continuing to wield this sword. With an unmatched aura, the protagonist comments that the monster should feel honored now that it has reached the limit of its growth. After all, the variant will be the first opponent to experience the strength of humanity in its own body. Roaring in rage as always, the monster clenches its fists and charges to finish off the adventurer once and for all. However, now it is easily repelled the moment it tries to attack. Alka calmly states that this kind of attack won't work anymore and punches the opponent straight in the chest. In addition, while the beast is thrown far away, he positions himself on top of it to follow with another strike, this time with gravity on his side. Naturally, the protagonist's display of strength causes a huge cloud of dust to rise. And with that, the monster gathers energy around its eye to use its final resort. This time, the variant bets everything on the power of its light beam. Then the system detects an energy convergence several times greater than the previous ones. But instead of running away, the hero says he'll be standing still, waiting for the enemy to give up. Being very close to the fallen variant, the monster fires its most powerful energy beam, and Alka prepares to take that power head on. Because for him, it doesn't matter how much the beast tries, and that becomes clear when a barrier that defends him from the attack is created. Since with a difference of 50 levels, Alka knows there's no longer any chance of being defeated. In the midst of a destroyed setting that was once a peaceful village, the two powerful beings face each other. And following its beastly nature, the variant tries to impose itself by roaring as always. But upon observing the protagonist's aura, something changes because it seems afraid. At first, the monster used its strongest power to devastate the people of this village, but now it's about to be subdued by an even more intense power, which for our hero, who has already lived through many experiences like this, obviously is nothing unusual in a world like this. After flying in the blink of an eye to the front of the monster, Alka chases it without hiding. Then the monster responds by preparing a punch to intercept the boy, but Alka not only dodges but also hits the variant's head, making it fall to the ground stunned. Even on the ground, it tries to keep fighting by preparing a quick laser attack and firing it at our hero. But Alka faces this already with a bit of boredom at the beast still insisting on this. Since that's the case, our hero says he's going to teach it what true despair is. Once again, the protagonist takes the attack head on, and this time doesn't even bother using much effort. Anyway, the monster keeps releasing its power continuously until it finally gets tired and stops the firepower. Even a little bit of smoke starts coming out of its eyes. However, the expression of surprise is what stands out the most because when the dust settles, the variant realizes that its opponent is completely fine. And that was the protagonist's strategy to make the difference between the two very clear. Understanding the meaning of that, the monster seems disappointed but also enraged. It screams without caring about the protagonist's strength and, determined to fight once again, tries to attack in any way possible. The monster mixes physical attacks with quick energy releases from its eyes. However, the protagonist dodges the attacks and even while in the air, manages to both evade the eye power and counterattack. In addition, with no more obstacles, it's now Alka's turn to attack, so the beast tries to defend itself with its arm as usual. But that was its worst mistake, because the hero's blade went straight through, cutting off one of the most important parts of the beast. Alka backs off and with little patience to continue, tells the monster to kneel so they can settle this quickly. Obviously, this hurts the variant's pride, so it starts firing energy beams everywhere. But none of that is effective, and with a horizontal slash, the hero makes the beast succumb to the overwhelming force of his power. When she falls to her knees, Alka immediately jumps over her. Therefore, since she hurt the people of this village a lot, our hero drives the sword right into the middle of the monster's eye. And so that beast that not long ago seemed practically invincible was defeated. With the hero's new victory, the system tries to absorb the levels but fails since the owner has reached the level cap. Thus, the system still finds a way by unlocking new features of the Abyss armor, making it possible to use level conversion to reach an even greater potential. The next day, after the victory over the fallen variant, people work hard to rebuild the city. This can be seen when one of them asks for some wood from the top of a roof. In response, a helper says he'll bring it immediately, but suddenly trips over a rock on the ground, making a fall inevitable. That is, if the protagonist hadn't appeared from behind to save the boy from this problem. Therefore, the citizen looks at his savior with a bit of surprise, but quickly thanks the village hero for the help. A little less busy a few minutes later, the protagonist decides to ask what exactly this level conversion mentioned earlier is. Then the system informs him that the owner can acquire new epic skills in exchange for his level. And about that, it is said that epic skills are valuable techniques with a variety of effects, such as increasing movement speed or fire resistance, which are examples of great resources for adventurers. Normally, these skills can be acquired during an early period while the person levels up. However, since our hero couldn't gain experience, he didn't obtain any of these skills. Therefore, even though he has already reached his maximum level, he didn't get any epic skills in return. But despite the opportunity being tempting, Alka focuses more on trying to understand what the hell this Abyss armor is. Regarding the first recommended skill, the system suggests one that can make the boy advance beyond human limits. However, the cost for this is 240 levels. There's basically everything he has achieved so far. Currently, the protagonist is at level 250, so losing everything is something that hurts quite a bit. But thinking about the future, this ability to advance beyond will be something essential. Because of this, the hero asks to receive the skill right away, and the system understands, placing it in activation order through the phrase "request the skill." Without thinking twice, the hero requests the level increase beyond human limits. Thus, the conversion starts to be executed, making our hero shiver as part of his power is drained. All the lights of the experience fading away are so flashy that citizens can see it from afar. And without stopping, from an energy core in the heart of our hero, all of that keeps flowing out, until finally, with an even more intense light, the system announces that the payment has been received and that the skill has been granted to the owner. In this way, Alka feels proud of how far he has come as a former corpse looter. However, an even stranger feeling remains because the hero realizes it's as if his own power has been expanded. Then the system informs him that the owner has surpassed the maximum level of humanity, which means he has become a transcendent being. In this case, Alka can't help but smile at his new achievement, and while reflecting and looking at the sky, he thinks once again how much things have changed. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the village, an irritated man comments that he came back because he thought it was time. All this fury was because our hero had already defeated the beast he was expecting to face. Therefore, his coming would be a waste of time, but even so, this adventurer became curious to know who there would be strong enough to defeat that monster. Back to the hero. Unexpectedly, since the maximum level was surpassed, the 200 that were pending will be transferred to the wearer of the armor. And the protagonist remembers this because when he defeated that monster, he wasn't able to drain its experience. Anyway, now Alka is at level 210, which even though it decreased because of the conversion, is still quite powerful. With this, Alka thinks that maybe he should obtain more epic skills that cost less, since they are very valuable, and if he manages to get many of them, he could become the one and only strongest adventurer in the world. In this case, the boy thinks that he has to make a plan for the future, but suddenly, with quick steps, Leela appears happy to see the hero and jumps toward him, leaving him embarrassed. With a cute expression, the girl comments that she was looking for him since after destroying the monster, life has become chaos. In this case, the hero apologizes and explains that the day before he was helping to put out the fires. However, Mill approaches saying that the girl was really worried about him, which was obviously also the case for her. Our hero comments that he is very happy that both of them are okay, but Leela insists on giving the boy credit for that. In the end, she's as grateful as she is embarrassed, and to show it, the girl expresses her affection by kissing the protagonist on the cheek, which, although simple, leaves her unable to look Alka in the eyes. For a moment after that kiss, the two look at each other with an expression that says a lot. Then Leela gathers her courage and closes her eyes to reveal that she loves the protagonist, but she also runs away extremely embarrassed. Alka is definitely the one who is most shocked. Mill, on the other hand, takes the situation more lightly, and even the baker appears to praise his godson's achievement. Then Alka, feeling both irritated and embarrassed, shouts loudly for the two of them to get out of there. In the end, the protagonist couldn't even imagine that someone could have feelings for him because of his past. He wondered what he should do now, then the system notified him that showing his masculinity was the recommended action, leaving Alka even more embarrassed. A few days later, on the road leading to the entrance of Rakel village, a group of adventurers approaches. The leader realizes that this is the place they were sent to, but since it seems abandoned, he believes they might have arrived too late. A colleague, in turn, comments that possibly another monster attacked the region. After all, if a flaming dragon had made an appearance there, the entire village would have already disappeared. In any case, the one with green hair believes they should go there to ask what happened, because they must do everything possible to prevent further disasters caused by the flaming dragon. Thus, he orders everyone to keep following him, and without refusing, the adventurers march alongside the leader Ain. Meanwhile, in the cave region where all the events took place, going deeper into the goblin-dominated area, an intense noise is heard, and the reason for this is the appearance of a very powerful black dragon. At this same moment in another place, the protagonist is testing his knife thrown against some herbivorous dinosaurs passing by, hitting them and defeating them very quickly despite being a large group. Alka is now back at level 1 and has gained new epic skills in these past few days. One of them is the permanent poison effect, which he just tested on the dinosaurs. The cost, however, was high because it took 200 levels from the hero. However, simply hitting an enemy with a poison-coated knife is enough to defeat small enemies. Another skill was increasing knife accuracy, so with these two, even if he loses levels due to conversion, he can raise his power without having to fight stronger opponents one-on-one. The downside is that it takes a few hours for the poison to drain the monster's health, but with this he could easily raise his level even as a beginner. Suddenly, a light begins to approach, indicating that apparently some monster has died. Then, upon absorbing the level, the armor jumps from the 1st to the 41st. In this case, Alka doesn't stop there and decides to increase the poison effect, causing it to return to the 1st again. In any case, this can help him raise his powers more quickly. At this moment, the protagonist is definitely tired. Since he has already pierced around 20 monsters out there, in a few hours he will be back at level 200. In this case, since he has achieved his goal, Alka simply decides to return to the village. Upon arriving there, the boy comes across all that commotion and immediately asks if something happened. Then the level 120 adventurer named Ian asks if the hero is from the same profession as them. And in case he is, he opens the system hoping it could be helpful, but soon realizes the level is a bit low. Since the protagonist sacrificed his powers for skills, everyone judges without knowing. But Alka is already quite familiar with this feeling of humiliation. To try to ease the tension, Ian comments that the boy must have just started in the adventuring world. However, he is surprised when the hero reveals that he has been at this for years. The white-haired colleague, in turn, joins the conversation joking with the boy, believing it to be a joke. But upon looking at Alka's serious face, even he understands the meaning of it. Faced with this, the man recalls that he heard rumors about such an adventurer famous for being the weakest of the weak who called himself a corpse scraper. Alka, in turn, does not deny being the person they are talking about but asks what they are going to do about it, creating a terrifying sense of intimidation. Ian, not wanting to start a fight, informs that they are in charge of a subjugation request from the guild. It is said that recently they spotted a certain unusual monster around this area, and when asked about it, he confirms that it is a black dragon called the Flaming Dragon, which is above level 150. That's why Ian warns that it will take more than just a few adventurers to defeat it. To solve the situation, everyone there formed a team with users of epic skills to defeat it. Therefore, the leader asks the boy to stay calm, and since they haven't introduced themselves, the two exchange names with a handshake. Alka thinks that if the monster is really level 150, he could certainly defeat it alone. However, since it's a black dragon, he wonders if it might be related to the body in the goblin cave. Suddenly, an adventurer from the group comes running, calling for the leader. And as soon as he catches his breath, he desperately informs that the escort group managed to find the flaming dragon they were looking for. The situation of this group, in turn, is even more desperate because with so few people. Ordinary adventurers are learning firsthand how terrifying a flaming black dragon can be. Back to the messenger's report, it is said that the reconnaissance group is currently leading the dragon toward the prairie. Ian then announces that they will head there right away, and informing everyone, the leader calls the adventurers to prepare for battle, which makes the warriors cheer with command. From what Alka can observe, the level of the adventurers in this subjugation team ranges from 80 to 120. But even though it's an elite group with epic skills, against a level 150 dragon, they will surely lose. Because of that, the hero understands that he can't leave them like this and shouts for the leader to take him along. At this moment, the monsters he pierced with the poison knife are about to die, and the hero will return to the 200 level range. However, since Ian doesn't know this, he denies the request because he cannot put a level 1 in danger. Even so, the hero tries to insist, and just like before, all those judging stares appear around him, asking with laughter what a level 1 would do to help despite the sense of justice he carries. This time, that white-haired man appears again and says that he will speak on behalf of his beloved leader. He then shouts for the weakling to stay out of it, which is exactly the same attitude everyone shows, leaving Alka behind. Even after being humiliated, the protagonist knows that if he doesn't do something, there will be casualties. But with his current level, it's no wonder they don't take him seriously. Therefore, he has no choice but to wait and follow the group later. Sometime later, even the leader, who is the strongest, finds himself intimidated by the monster's power. After all, the reports about the opponent being a level 150 flame dragon weren't even close to being accurate. This is actually a disaster level monster and dragon king who unites all black dragons. This is the Black Dragon King, a giant and imposing monster of level 300 with the title of Flaming Destroyer. Obviously, faced with that terrifying being, the leader sees immediate retreat as the only option because they certainly won't be able to handle it alone. At the moment, the most appropriate thing to do is to contact the guild to get reinforcements. However, the dragon is obviously not a monster that will wait until its enemies become stronger. Then, with a simple movement of its tail, it launches the leader far away as if he were an insect. From afar, Alka approaches at high speed, worried about the battle, and has already begun. Even from that distance, he realizes that the dragon is certainly the same one from the goblin cave. So Alka can hardly believe that the monster regenerated from that state. In any case, he advances knowing that now is not the time to think about it. And the moment the monster prepares a devastating attack, gathering the power of flames in its mouth. The protagonist asks the armor how long it will take to recover the levels, to which the system responds that it will take about 30 more seconds, but even at full speed, the dragon's attack is imminent. Then he desperately pleads to get his powers back as quickly as possible, until finally the experienced lights begin to appear behind him and soon merge into his body, confirming the defeat of the monsters by poison, and bringing the protagonist back to the level 201 range. However, instead of continuing like that, he requests the flame nullification skill before the monster attacks. The Dragon King launches its fire breath with maximum power. and soon all that massive power heads toward our hero, who, with great difficulty, manages to use the skill he just learned, saving unfortunately only one person. Ein, who happened to be the lucky one, is impressed that the boy managed to stop the breath of the flaming destroyer. And more than that, the white-haired one from before, who is in terrible condition, can hardly believe that a corpse looter is holding out more than they did. In the end, the hero reveals that it's because he is much stronger than all of them, but unfortunately, he couldn't protect them because he was weakened. Therefore, he apologizes for his incompetence, and the man collapses to the ground, apparently lifeless. Alka becomes angrier than he has ever been because no matter how strong he gets, lives continue to slip through his hands. So for the sake of the adventurers he couldn't protect, the hero screams that he will defeat the monster right now. The Dragon King unleashes another powerful fire breath, and Ein shouts for the boy to get out of the way. However, Alpa says it's okay and takes the attack head-on, simply catching it with his hands and crushing it easily. He then states that this kind of fireball won't work. Faced with this, Ein tries to understand what is happening, and irritated that he cannot defeat the adventurer, the dragon breathes more fire. However, the hero continues deflecting all the attempts to destroy him without difficulty. At this moment, the flame attacks won't work anymore, but in exchange for the fire nullification, the boy lost a large portion of his level, returning to level 21. In this case, he wonders if he will really be able to surpass the dragon, as well as whether there's any way to increase his level again. Anyway, the Dragon King now prepares a physical charge and nearly hits the protagonist with its claws, demonstrating just how powerful a swipe from such a giant monster can be. Obviously, the hero understands that he won't be able to react to those claws at his current level, but while his attention was focused on the front, suddenly, the monster's tail came toward the protagonist at high speed. And in this situation, there was nothing else he could do to escape, at least on the hero's part, because suddenly someone appeared, commenting that this was a disgrace and with just one strike, cut the dragon in half. Thus, with the monster defeated, this person stood atop the corpse, leaving our hero shocked by the feat. Logically, the protagonist shouts, asking who this warrior is. Then, with a proud smile, the man introduces himself as Balder, one of the only Calamity-class adventurers on the continent. Alka can barely believe what he's hearing, and Ein comments that he has never met one in person before. It is said that the strength of this type of adventurer creates stories, and their deeds create legends. It is an existence that transcends the boundaries of humanity and the warrior who reigns supreme above everything they can reach. This is the meaning of the Calamity class in the adventurer ranking. Faced with this, Balder comments that the green-haired one knows well what he's talking about. And when looking at the system, the hero realizes that the guy really is beyond the limits since he is level 300. Balder is known for being someone born with the ability to break limits, which is the exact opposite of the protagonist's condition. Anyway, he asks if the boy is there to save them, but the adventurer feels offended just thinking about that possibility. Then he states that the two misunderstood because he only came to confront a black-armored adventurer who ruined his plans. Regarding that, the protagonist asks what plans those are, so the redhead starts to explain. After asking the locals, they said that a black-armored hero defended the village from the one-eyed monster. Therefore, Balder was wondering what kind of warrior it was, but was disappointed to find out it was just a weakling. At this moment, the dragon shows that it is not dead yet and moves, trying to react. However, the adventurer asserts his dominance by driving his sword and once again to silence the beasts, since he is in the middle of his speech. Back to the conversation, after educating the dragon, Balder reveals that as long as the core of the flaming destroyer is not destroyed, it will keep regenerating. Therefore, he also reveals that he killed this beast once in the goblin nest, which finally makes the protagonist connect the dots. However, the adventurer states that he didn't destroy the core on purpose, leaving the hero confused, wondering why. The answer was that when the monster ate the flesh of the flaming destroyer, its structure changed drastically, making it go berserk. The Dragon King is so powerful that it could obliterate an entire village, so he needed something a little weaker. Thus, a monster in a berserk state was exactly what he needed to attack the village and then be killed by the so-called savior of the place. So the second part of the plan would be to defeat the guilty dragon a second time. That way he could gain more fame than simply killing it with no audience around. Naturally, Ein is shocked that this is being said so casually. But back to the complaint, Balder shouts that Alka ruined everything when he intervened in his plan. With his head down, Alka asks if the guy really put the entire village at risk for something like that. Then the adventurer laughs loudly and states that all a Calamity-ranked adventurer seeks is fame, gold, and women to enjoy life. That declaration was exactly what the protagonist needed to make his decision. Therefore, with a terrifying expression, he declared that it was truly absurd, since for the sake of his selfish desires, the adventurer let innocent people get hurt and comrades die. All of this because of the guy's enormous greed. Thus, the protagonist asks the Abyss armor to lend him some of its strength, because he will definitely take down this Calamity-class adventurer right now. Obviously, Balder sees this speech as a joke, but also gets furious just because Alka insinuated that he could defeat him. And to display his dominance, he demonstrates a bit of his power by releasing a strong aura. Alka understands that the guy is at level 300 and realizes that if he fights head-on, he will be obliterated since he's only at level 21. But right behind the guy, there's still a chance with that crystal from the Dragon King. That core is on the verge of collapse, so if the protagonist can destroy it and absorb the level of the flaming destroyer, there will be a chance to win. Anyway, the protagonist asks if there's any skill suitable to destroy the core from a distance. Then the system starts searching, but since it takes a few seconds, the Calamity-class adventurer jumps on the protagonist, ready to finish him off, and before he can react, the attack connects, sending both the hero and Ein flying. In any case, the protagonist is the one who gets hurt the most, being dragged across the ground by that devastating power. Thus, he realizes what it truly means to be a Calamity-class adventurer. Balder, in turn, comments that it's a shame he missed, but guarantees he won't next time. At this rate, the defeat of our hero is clear, but but the system search is completed, and the option to acquire the skill called micro-explosive weapon appears. The skill can make the weapon itself explode, and the cost is 20 points, so the hero asks what he should do with it. Because if he explodes his sword, it won't destroy the core from afar, and doing it with his main weapon isn't recommended. Therefore, logically, the hero questions what he should do. Then the idea that comes is to use the poison knife he used to level up, and now Alka understands the plan. Balder, on the other hand, finds it annoying that the hero is still standing. He shouts that just one punch will be enough. But at that moment, the protagonist requests the micro-explosive weapon skill. Logically, Balder doesn't understand what the boy is doing, but the protagonist doesn't need to explain and simply grabs his knives. Then, with great confidence, he states that with this, he will turn the game around and throws all three toward the target. As the blades fly in his direction, Balder realizes they are knives with permanent poison. However, he easily deflects the ones that come near him, complimenting the hero's skill, but also saying it's useless if he can't hit the target, which the protagonist agrees with, but also says that there's no problem. After all, those knives were just distractions for the one that went toward the core, and at the moment when it was close to collapsing, the hero shouted to activate the detonation, causing an explosion in the core, leaving the protagonist proud because with that, the flaming destroyer is finally defeated. And at the very instant the monster dies, all its experience begins to flow out of its body, leaving Balder shocked. In any case, now the levels are absorbed by the protagonist and even without fully understanding it. The fact is that our hero advances toward the adventurer quickly, making the two start clashing. Balder simply couldn't comprehend this power since the hero was at level 21 just a few minutes ago. Then Alka confirmed that the warrior was right, but only in the past, because now his power is that of a level 300 and one adventurer. Faced with this, the warrior gets angry because he finally understands how the protagonist defeated that one-eyed monster. It was all thanks to this mysterious ability the protagonist has, and filled with rage, the warrior strikes with force, sending the protagonist flying. The redhead then tells the boy not to mess with him since his simple advantage of just one level won't be enough to surpass the experience of an adventurer like him, who was at the Calamity class level. With another attack, Balder destroys the ground where the protagonist stands, but is surprised when he looks more closely, because our hero uses centrifugal force to land a powerful overhead blow, causing another massive destruction. Alka yells, questioning that talk about having less experience, and parries the adventurer's weapon. Then prepared to strike, he states that against a blade stained by greed, he can never be defeated, which he demonstrates with several cuts across the villain's body until Balder also gets furious. With an aura more powerful than ever, Balder praises the courage of the boy in black armor for shouting in his presence. But now his rage is so great that he simply tells Alka to shut up, and activating his epic ability, the manifestation of the Tyrant God is unleashed. While screaming with rage and releasing his aura, a powerful lightning bolt falls from the sky and strikes Balder directly. Then a transformation starts happening in the adventurer's body, making his hair rise and lightning appear all over his body. Naturally, Alka is very scared, and all Balder can say is the word power repeatedly. Then with a devastating attack, he states that this is the true power of a Calamity class adventurer, and in an instant, it closes in about to hit the hero as Balder shouts for the boy not to run. It is more than clear that if this attack hits the protagonist, it will all be over. So he dodges with everything he has but understands the extent of the Tyrant God's power. Alka thinks he will have to use that thing he found while checking the skills list. It was a special ability that could only be used once, so now the protagonist steps back and shouts to request the ability from the system, which causes Balder to attack again to stop him. However, just as he would be hit by that charge, a shield appears in front of him, with I'm responsible for his defense, causing the boy to take the full impact and fall onto his back on the ground. Even so, with his last strength, Ein gets up. With deep regret, he comments that if he had defeated the Dragon King from the start, his comrades would be alive, and precisely because of that, he cries desperately, begging the hero to avenge his companions, which Alka accepts because of the boy's sincerity. Finally, the hero requests the skill, and this time what he asks for is the Curse of the Black Armor. Balder, on the other hand, continues attacking non-stop, telling Alka to shut up already. As a massive energy approaches, the system informs that the requested ability can only be used once and asks for confirmation, which the hero gives. With that, the request is confirmed, and the cost will be one level plus an optional additional level cost. In this case, while defending himself, the protagonist tells the system to apply the additional level cost. And to acquire this ability, he offers all the 300 levels he has, which is confirmed, generating the level conversion that happens instantly. As if it were something transcendent from the heavens, then Ein, watching everything without understanding, asks who the hell the protagonist is. Naturally, after the conversion, the hero returns to being a level 1 adventurer. Balder becomes curious to know what the protagonist just did. But when he decides to look at the hero's status window, he starts laughing a lot, realizing he's back to being a level 1 warrior. The adventurer thinks that this was the limit of the hero's ability, and then charges, expecting to send the boy to the afterlife. However, he couldn't be more wrong because our hero's plan was to drag Balder down with him. At that moment, the Curse of the Black Armor is activated. The redhead is startled because suddenly an evil energy starts emanating from Alka's body. Quickly, this energy envelops the adventurer's body, restraining him in various ways. And even after a short time under this, he realizes that his power is decreasing. Then the hero announces that this is the Curse of the Black Armor. For each additional level cost paid, the ability reduces the opponent's level by the same amount. That said, even if Balder tries to react, nothing will change, since the additional cost was 299 levels. Now that will be the amount taken from the adventurer. With a very serious expression, the hero then asks how many levels the adventurer thinks he will have left. Obviously, someone as greedy as him cannot believe in that possibility and screams, begging to be left alone. However, the hero replies with a proud smile, saying it's quite simple because now both he and the adventurer are tied at level 1. At the end of the abilities process, Baldur falls from the sky to the ground and is still unable to believe something like this can happen. He shouts, calling for his magic window. However, the moment he looked, the reality was clear, and finally the great calamity-ranked adventurer was reduced to level 1. Definitely, the boy had never been so angry, but even at level 1, he gritted his teeth and declared that he wouldn't lose. After all, he was still a calamity-class adventurer, and even weakened, he believed he could beat someone like him. That's what he thought, because in an instant, the protagonist appeared with a precise attack. And so he declared that in the village of Rakel not long ago, there was a man judged for being a corpse looter. This same man was born unable to acquire experience and couldn't level up. However, this whole story wasn't making any sense to Baldur, who shouted for Alka not to mess with him and attacked with his sword, making the hero step back. In any case, Alka continues the story, saying that this man was level 1 his whole life. Then he finally reaches the conclusion of this tale, saying it's a shame for Baldur to have been the opposite case of his. After all, the corpse looter, who was the protagonist, knew how to fight at level 1 better than anyone else in this world. Without his arm, the adventurer's wound starts bleeding uncontrollably. However, still under the effect of the Tyrant God's ability, Baldur remains standing and holds his sword, saying he hasn't lost yet. However, for the protagonist, that's already enough to decide the battle's outcome. Even in this situation, Baldur is too proud to back down, so he runs and tries to attack the boy from behind, screaming in rage. This makes the protagonist despise the warrior's attitude, since he can no longer even maintain his composure. Alka quickly disarms the warrior, and since he insists on attacking, delivers several cuts across his body. Thus, the adventurer takes it all head on and finally collapses, defeated on the ground. A few seconds later, Ian, who is still able to stand, approaches to talk. He thanks our hero from the bottom of his heart for avenging his companions. However, the protagonist replies with a smile that there's no need to thank him. After all, he also couldn't forgive him and would have fought even if there hadn't been a request. Besides, Alka becomes serious again because apparently things aren't over yet. With his last strength, Baldur shouts at the boy in black armor. In this state, he acknowledges that he has lost both his arm and his powers as a calamity-class adventurer. And despite not liking it, he informs that for sure others just as strong will soon find out about this. If he suddenly disappears, his fellow calamity-class companions will try to figure out what's going on. In the end, they are a bunch of very difficult people to understand, but Baldur makes a point of warning that someone else will come in his place, and that sooner or later, it will all be over for the protagonist. Alka, in turn, states that if another calamity-class adventurer wants to challenge him, he'll simply have to defeat everyone who comes. Then Baldur laughs, hoping the protagonist won't lose that confidence. In any case, at this moment, he has already lost too much blood, so something starts to glow, and the adventurer says his farewell. Ein shouts that this is a teleportation item, and our hero runs as fast as he can to not let him escape. But Baldur warns that if the boy doesn't die alone, the next time they meet, he will be the one to defeat him. And without giving the protagonist time to reach him, the adventurer is teleported far away into the sky. In the end, he managed to escape, so Aang shouts, asking what he should do since now there's the possibility that he might attack. But for the hero, it's fine to just let him go, because even if he shows up again in the future, Alka is confident that he won't lose, which is enough to make Ein a little calmer. In any case, it's still a fact that many people lost their lives that day. Ein comments that he will have to report everything that happened to the city where he came from. Then suddenly, the protagonist apologizes to the adventurer's surprise because he has a request to make and needs the boy to listen. Naturally, the adventurer asks if Alka is sure about what he wants, but the protagonist states that he has already decided. Therefore, the two seem happy since our hero's goal now is to leave the village. A few seconds ago, when the protagonist asked for a favor, Ein was wondering what kind of favor someone so strong could possibly ask for, but thinking that he wanted to be taken to another city was something quite unexpected. To be honest, the hero would have liked to continue being an adventurer in this village. But after this incident, those calamity-class adventurers are now watching him. Therefore, Alka is afraid that someone like Baldur might come again, and he doesn't want the place where he was born to get involved once more. And it is precisely because he understands this choice that the green-haired boy decided to accept it. Now that the flaming destroyer is no longer a threat, Ein shows a necklace with a magical communication stone. It was used to request that adventurers be sent to deal with the aftermath. Even after the boy leaves, those warriors will protect the village, making it safe for now. Thus, Alka is very grateful, but while the two walk through the city, Mill watches everything from a distance and quickly runs over, very worried. At the moment when the two arrive at the uncle's bakery, for some reason the place is closed and the old man isn't there. Ein then asks if the hero has anyone he wants to say goodbye to, and Alka confirms, so the green-haired one suggests that they leave another day. However, Alka still decides to leave since it would be difficult to say goodbye if he met those people. Not only his uncle, but also Mill and Leela. In the end, the protagonist doesn't want to say goodbye to anyone since being involved with him will only cause them to get hurt. Therefore, the two adventurers arrive at the entrance of the city. Before leaving, Ein warns that once he goes, it won't be easy to come back. But the hero states that he has no conflicting thoughts, which allows him to leave without looking back. However, just as he was about to leave, his name was called by the uncle who raised him. Even at that moment, the old man comments that the boy doesn't need to be sad if he's leaving. He happened to hear that the boy was preparing for a trip, so he decided to bake some bread for him. Therefore, the uncle hands it over, and Alka apologizes profusely for leaving the village without saying anything. But once again, the old man asks our hero to smile with a very happy expression. After all, he is sure there's a good reason for leaving this place. The fact is that the old man has been watching the protagonist's adventure life since the beginning. Therefore, he asks to at least see a smile on the boy's face, which, after understanding the message being passed, Alka smiles and says goodbye with affection. Later, already a few minutes away from the village, Ein comments that the old man is a good person, and the hero agrees. Then he takes a piece of the bread and eats it in silence, making Ein ask curiously about the taste. Therefore, with a feeling of nostalgia, Alka says it's delicious, making both of them happy. In any case, Ein comments that the destination now is the city where his guild is located, which is the administrative city of the south called Garamu. Thus, with the two about to arrive in the city, Mel informed Leela about what had happened, but it was already too late because Alka had left Reiko behind. Near Daramu, a group of goblins led by one at level 5 ambush a wagon. Ein obviously gets desperate upon realizing that the market wagon is being attacked. Then Alka asks Ian to hold the bag of bread for a moment because this is exactly what he needed, since he wanted to increase his level a little before arriving at the city. Thus, the protagonist defeats all the monsters with ease, absorbing the experience, and the same fate happens to the higher level one, the leader. Therefore, watching everything from a distance, Ein becomes anxious to see how strong the protagonist will become. And after just a few seconds of fighting, our hero finishes off all those monsters, becoming even stronger. Thus, now all that's left is to finish the path to the administrative city of the south. With the two now able to see the people and buildings, Ein comments that they finally arrived, which surprises the protagonist. He then introduces the protagonist to this place, which is the southern administrative city called Daramu. Daramu is a city located northwest of the village of Reiko, and is the largest city in the southern part of the continent. As soon as he enters, the protagonist notices that there are many people in the place, and that the atmosphere is quite different from what he is used to. But for Ein, this was already expected from the largest city in the region. In addition, it is said that in the center of the place there is also the southern branch of the Central Adventurers Management Council. Many guilds operate in this city, and there are also many talented adventurers. Therefore, Ein comments that the protagonist will not stand out much there while keeping his level as low as it is now. Currently, the protagonist has risen from level 1 and is now at level 100. In this case, he understands that it does not make sense to increase his power too much when it is not necessary, and he thanks his new friend for this advice. On the way to the city, our hero is trying to raise his level as much as possible. However, at one point, Ain suggested that the boy should not raise his power scale too much. After all, if he entered the place with a very high level, he would attract a lot of attention. For example, if he walked around the city at level 300, the birth of the new Calamity class adventurer would become a hot topic in Daramu. And if that happens, other adventurers just as strong will notice him. Furthermore, if they discover that the protagonist is the one who defeated Balder, he will possibly have to face a fight in the middle of the city. And many Calamity class adventurers are also problematic, so it is best to avoid detection. To demonstrate what he is saying, Ein observes a frightened little bunny after the fight against the goblins. He comments that normally there is no reason for adventurers to fight among themselves. And with a very friendly expression, he calls the bunny for a hug, saying that they actually exist to maintain peace. Faced with all of this, Alka thinks that Ein is definitely an adventurer he can respect. Generally, the social class is often obsessed with money and fame, as in the case of Balder. That is why the protagonist hopes that one day he can become an adventurer like Ian, since just having a high level is not enough because he also needs to match the sense of justice that Ein has. Anyway, the hero asks where they are going now. Then Ein apologizes for having forgotten to say and reveals that they will visit the Central Management Council to report on the Dragon King case. However, suddenly the boy's expression becomes darker, and this causes doubt in our hero. Already inside the headquarters of the Central Adventurers Council, and at the main reception desk, a staff member greets them, asking if he is there to report the conclusion. However, Ein states that he has already reported via magic message, so the girl says she will prepare the reward. But before anything else, she asks with a smile what the completed mission was. And without hesitation, Ein reveals that it was to kill the Dragon King of Reiko Village, which leaves the receptionist in shock given how high profile that mission was. Anyway, she hastily informs that she will bring the reward immediately, and soon places 4 bags full of gold coins on the table, while Ein remains silent. The staff member informs that for this commission, the money from the victims goes to the survivors. However, since Ein is the only one there, he will be the one to receive everything, the girl says, anguished by the situation. Finally, the protagonist manages to understand the reason why his friend seems so sad. The fact that he receives all the money for his fallen friends is basically torture for someone so kind. Anyway, the girl asks Ein to be careful, but when the two leave with the reward, the hero asks him the reason for that. Thus, Ein creates a scenario in which family members or friends volunteer for a team and die, while only the leader survives to receive the entire reward. And in this case, he asks what Alka would think of this leader. In the end, the hero begins to understand, but as soon as they leave the guild, what Ein said becomes clear because it happens faster than expected. If it were possible, he did not want to involve the protagonist in this. But the fact was that now, in front of both of them, many were there to judge the adventurer in the worst possible way, saying horrible things. But these were just the feelings of the families and friends of the deceased, and as the leader of the group, Ein stated that it was his duty to face their anger. In the end, he was the one who led the attack team that resulted in the death of all his companions. And because of that, no matter how much he regrets or fights against it, nothing will change the reality. While the boy endures the pressure, all the people clamor for him to say something about the colleagues who were left to die. Then, after listening to each complaint from the citizens and the adventurers' families, Ein states that he will take full responsibility head-on. He agrees that he was unable to save any member of the intervention team and that he eventually let them all die. Then the wave of hatred from the people stops for a moment, but soon returns since some do not care how regretful he is. After all, the attack team was made up of the best of the best. Thus, one of the family members yells that he cannot believe that everyone was killed by a level 150 dragon. Faced with this, Alka realizes that something is wrong with that statement. That monster they fought was actually a level 300 dragon king, which made the group's defeat natural. That's why our hero quickly asks for everyone's attention to explain the situation. However, Ein simply thanked the boy for trying to defend him and continued to carry the guilt for his companions' deaths. For him, if at that moment they had immediately withdrawn and evacuated together with the citizens, everything could have been different. Therefore, Alka tries to argue, but his friend does not seem willing to listen. Suddenly, a person approaches saying that what they are saying is nonsense, because in this man's view, the leader must have intentionally let the others die. That way, he could take the entire reward for himself. Faced with this statement, Alka can no longer hold back and steps forward, shouting that Ein would never do something like that, which surprises his companion. That man, in turn, tells the hero to shut up, saying he doesn't want to hear what a foreigner has to say. However, the protagonist states that he is not a foreigner and that in fact he is an adventurer who fought alongside the leader against the Flame Destroyer, a level 300 monster. Upon hearing this, even the angry family members begin to have doubts because if it's true, someone surviving is a miracle. Still, the man believes the boy is talking nonsense. But despite not wanting to admit it, he realizes that the hero is as strong as he is after checking his status. Anyway, he irritably questions what kind of miracle at level 110 has to survive against a level 300 monster, and the hero replies that he has many. This makes the man laugh a lot, thinking it's a joke, until he returns to seriousness, ordering the protagonist to step aside, but Alka says he will not. This creates instant tension between the two, who soon begin to confront each other. Only the wind from their clashing swords disturbs the entire place, then Ein yells at Alka to stop, because the leader's mind constantly thinks that everything happening is his fault since he failed to save his precious friends. And now, because he was a useless leader, Alka is trying to clear his reputation by fighting for him. However, the hero makes sure to deny all these depressing statements. He agrees that it is true that everyone in the attack team was killed, but he strikes the bald man with the conviction that this is not everything because in the end, it was just an accident that no one could have predicted. Furthermore, the leader was there for his companions until the very end, even when he had to face a much stronger enemy. That's why the protagonist shouts that Ein should not be ashamed because he did not abandon his companions. And with a precise strike, he disarms the bald man, leaving him trembling while standing from the blows he suffered in the duel. In addition, with a proud expression, the hero sincerely asks how someone who cries so much for his fallen comrades can be considered a useless leader. At this moment, the hero states that he will not oppose if his companion truly wants to take responsibility for the team's fatality. However, he says that blaming himself for all of this without clarifying the misunderstandings around him is wrong, because Alka himself wants everyone to know the truth, that Ein was a leader who never ran away no matter how exhausting the situation was. Ein, in turn, with tears in his eyes, asks why the hero is going so far. Then, setting a hand to his companion, Alka reveals that it is because he is an adventurer who deeply respects him, which is certainly a good enough reason. Faced with this touching moment, the bald man fills with rage and prepares a dirty trick. Cunningly, he throws a hidden knife from behind toward the two, and since the object was coming at a very high speed, it wouldn't have time to react. That is, until suddenly an old man with a sword appeared to put an end to this situation. And with the sword very close to the bald man's neck, this old man commented that he had already been waiting for Ein's return. Alka remains on high alert and points his sword at the old man because of his intimidating presence. However, Ein pushes the protagonist aside and introduces the old man as the highest authority of his guild, Sword of Salvation. This is the guild master named Gilly, level 200. Alka, in turn, still doesn't know how to behave, especially since the old man seems very angry while talking to him. Anyway, Gilly asks if the boy is the adventurer who protected Ein from the Black Dragon King, which everyone hears with collective surprise that this rumor might be real. Additionally, with the same irritated expression, the old man shows that he also knows that Alka dealt with the fugitive Balder to the hero's surprise. To explain, Ein reveals that he had to be careful with the commission and reported about Balder to the master and to the central management. There was a fact that that adventurer had left the monster on the brink of death. However, since it was the protagonist who destroyed the core and since Balder had a malicious intent behind it, the money was paid to them. In the past few days, Gilly had been away from Daramu to face a monster in a distant place, and he received Ein's report via magic message while he was there. But when he returned, unfortunately, he came across a bunch of fools blaming the survivor, without even bothering to find out the details of what happened to the attack team. Regarding the mourning or regret for the loss of family and friends, the old man states that he will not interfere. However, Gilly shouts that to be an adventurer is to protect peace at the cost of your own life. Upon hearing this, the protagonist connects it to Ein's speech when he hugged the bunny. Back to the old man's speech, he says that the warriors died doing exactly that. But placing the blame on anyone else is an insult to all those men and women who risked their lives, which leaves everyone silent. In the end, this clears up the misunderstanding. So the protagonist asks if Gilly is on their side, and Ein agrees but also clarifies that he is not that soft. This becomes clear when it's time for Ein's scolding because Gilly simply announces that the boy is expelled from the guild. Obviously, the protagonist is outraged by this and the boy becomes very sad. However, even if it's a misunderstanding, the old man states that there is no excuse for the boy's lack of competence. Thus, the incompetent leader who annihilated an entire team cannot remain in the Sword of Salvation, which is the most promising guild in Daramu. Despite the initial indignation, the hero manages to understand that this is what it means to be the most powerful guild. And since they are proud of it, Ein accepts his condition without protest but asks to make one request before leaving, which Gilly agrees to hear. What he actually wants is to recommend the protagonist as a member of the Sword of Salvation. To Alka's surprise, the former leader makes a point of praising him, saying he is a promising adventurer who definitely has competence. And he states with a smile that even if he's expelled, he doesn't need to worry about his future, so Gilly agrees. But right at that moment, Alka shouts that he will have to refuse, which leaves his companion confused about the reason. Alka understands that maybe Ein's expulsion from the Sword of Salvation is indeed inevitable. However, without mincing words, the protagonist states that a guild that cuts off valuable members in this way is not a place where he wants to be. Trying to calm Alka, the former leader starts listing all the benefits that will be given to the hero if he joins. And in addition, he makes it clear that to remain active as an adventurer, one needs to belong to a guild. So our hero asks if all he needs to do is join a guild. And if that's the case, he decides that he will create one with his own hands so the two of them can join. For some time, the two boys actually start walking around the city looking for a place, until they finally arrive at where the headquarters of the Heroes Guild can be established. However, upon arriving there, their expressions are of surprise instead of happiness because of the condition of the place. Alka even asks if this is really the right place, but Ein answers with a smile on his face that it is. In the end, this will be the place that will form their base for now. It will not only be the starting point for our hero, but also a new beginning for Ingen, who, despite the problems of the day, is quite happy that the protagonist decided to bring him into his guild, which doesn't seem different from how the protagonist feels. Right at the moment when he declared that he would create his own guild, the hero looked at Ein, who had just been expelled, and recruited the boy immediately on the spot, which, although strange, Gilly did not intervene. Back to the present, the protagonist comments that he believes he still has a lot to learn from Ein, so he asks the boy to teach him all these things so that he can become a great adventurer. And so the two shake hands, marking the beginning of a new chapter. Leaving those matters aside, upon entering the new guild headquarters, Alka comments that they need to do something about this place first. However, Ein reminds him that it is not an official place and that they also don't have any money. In fact, he is already quite grateful that they managed to take a bit of the remaining money from the reward, because it is explained that most of the money they received for defeating the Flame Destroyer was given to the families of the deceased adventurers, which apparently had been the plan of the former leader since the moment he went to claim the reward. In the end, all that's left for the two are just a few gold coins, and when the protagonist opens one of the cabinets, the dust creates a cloud around his body, which makes him cough a lot and makes Ian burst out laughing. Thus, Alka understands that the priority now is something else. He quickly grabs a mop along with a bucket of water, and the boys prepare to clean the place. As powerful adventurers, they don't take their job lightly. Ein asks the hero to be careful, but it's already too late because he slips on the wet floor and falls on his back, with the mop landing on his head. Yet even in a situation like this, Alka keeps his good humor and laughs at his own misfortune. After all, as long as he can use level draining, all he has to do is fight. Besides, for the protagonist, sometimes a day like this might not be so bad. At that very moment in front of the guild, two people show up and abruptly open the gate, asking for permission, which leaves the boys confused. Unexpectedly, these people are the girls from Rakel Village, Mill and Leela. Mill, in turn, shouts asking how the hero could leave them behind, and Leela agrees. In the end, the two pressure the protagonist to give them an explanation. Meanwhile, during the day, knights are running desperately because of an emergency, and as they approach the entrance of the castle, they shout for anyone who can help to come to the west gate. One of the warriors even calls the city guards for help, which leaves them confused. However, the danger was already certain because the fact was that a terrible monster had appeared along with an army at the west gate. This horrible monster looked very much like a spider and in front of the city guards. The local warrior who had been captured by the beast, unfortunately, even while crying and begging for help, was eliminated right there, and then devoured, generating sounds that left the warriors at the very least terrified. This was the first demonstration of the monster's power, and being larger than the walls, its roar made it clear that it wouldn't stop there. Back at the headquarters of the new guild, the girls question once again why our hero left without telling them, as they want a full explanation. So Alka prepares to come up with a good excuse, but right at that moment, someone knocks on the door, catching everyone's attention. It's an urgent call from outside because of the great monster that appeared at the west gate. A warrior, who is desperate, shouts for any available adventurer to hurry over and help. So Alka calls his friend, who, upon understanding the situation, immediately comments that they should go there as well. Thus, Alka turns to the girls, and regarding the reason for leaving the village is that he will give a full explanation later. But for now, he asks them to stay there and wait while he deals with the problem, because this will be his first job in the southern administrative city called Daramu. At that same moment at the west gate, people fall into despair upon seeing the enormous number of monsters. After all, this was something that appeared right in front of Daramu out of nowhere. And the leader of this army of small beasts is some type of curse being at level 210. That bald guy from earlier named Bill fights against level 20 skeletons and naturally destroys them without any trouble. However, the problem was that the more he destroyed, the more skeletons appeared to be defeated. Still, Bill advances with all this power and defeats yet another horde of them with a single attack. After finishing them off, the bald man asks a guard where Gilly is and hears that the old man said he was on his way. Anyway, Gilly is late because at this pace, the front line will be destroyed. But the worst problem was now felt by Bill because right behind him, that huge monster appeared. And despite feeling fear, the bald man simply starts laughing, especially since several energy cycles were created, making it impossible to react in any way. In the end, all those soldiers and adventurers were cornered by the monster's power, and both Bill and the others were captured by those expanding energy spheres, which made some of them unable to move anymore. Fortunately, this was not a lethal attack, but the bald man notices that it seems to be a demonic curse. A powerful type of curse that starts by numbing the body until it corrupts the victim. Faced with this, a skeleton starts laughing, thinking that the fight will become much easier for them. And since Bill can barely feel his body, he feels disgusted at the thought that he might be killed by this trash. However, that didn't happen because at the last moment, our hero appeared, destroying the threat and placing himself in front of the adventurer. With the armor skill, the level is absorbed, so Alka calls for Ein, who responds while defeating several skeletons. Alka wanted to call him to warn that he would start leveling up now. However, despite having advised against it before, the current situation was an exception. Thus, in an instant, the protagonist defeats several skeletons to absorb their powers until he reaches level 250. With that goal complete, Ein informs that Alka can lead the smaller monsters to him, saying that he'll be fine alone. Then Alka understands and starts releasing part of his power, making the monster roar in an attempt to assert its dominance. It seems this is a curse-spewing monster that has already affected many of the city's adventurers. But with a smile on his face, the protagonist jumps over it, saying that now it's the beast's turn to be cursed. And he ironically says that the monster is lucky because it apparently loves curses. In the southern administrative city of Daramu at the east gate, Gilly walks outside exuding his immense aura. From what he heard, monsters appeared at the west gate, but after hearing how noisy the east gate was, he decided to take a closer look. And there he found another huge monster nest in the place, just like on the other side. As it's facing a strong adventurer, the monster roars loudly. And so the battle between the level 200 adventurer and the level 210 curse-type monster becomes imminent. Surprisingly, this monster copy also has an army of skeletons, and soon it prepares to use all the curses that were demonstrated before, now all aimed at the old man. That's why Gilly praises the fact that the monster is not holding back even against just one adventurer. But the old man also states that since he is its enemy, it will be a pity because no matter how many are in the army, it will never match his power. Exuding power, Gilly activates his epic skill called Descent of the Demons. And the moment the monsters charge at him, he declares that their lives will end in 15 seconds. Back at the west gate, where our hero jumps over the monster, he reaffirms that it is indeed lucky, and strikes the beast with his sword right in the head area. At this moment, our hero is at level 250, and is in the middle of a duel against a level 210 monster. As he lands on the ground, the protagonist quickly cuts off one of the aberration's legs with ease. Then the skeleton army positions itself behind him to attempt a sneak attack. However, the protagonist notices before they can succeed and defeats one with a sword attack and another with a kick. Furthermore, the third and final skeleton has its sword grabbed by the hero, who mocks it, saying that the monster has no power to change the course of this battle if that is supposed to be a serious attack. Once again, Alka absorbs the levels from all of them, which brings him to level 290 to the terror of the skeletons. The cursed monster roars as loud as it can in pain and tries to attack our hero in various ways, but he dodges all the attacks. Then that monster launches several curses, and Ein shouts for Alka not to let those spheres touch him. Although something like that didn't even need to be said because the protagonist drove his sword into the ground, creating a huge barrier of light. And with something like that, definitely no curse could reach him. Bill, in turn, even without being able to move, watches the fight unable to believe what is happening. After all, for him, it doesn't make sense that Alka is the same guy he fought not long ago. Finally, the protagonist manages to cause significant damage to the monster's body, making it fall face first to the ground. Then, very close to the beast's face, the hero asks if it is satisfied with all the chaos it has caused. At this moment, it had already cursed many, so the hero commented that it didn't need to answer, because regardless of what it said, the monster was destined to die now. As its last breath, the cursed monster moves its eyes wildly to the hero's surprise, causing countless curses to be launched into the air. Alka, in turn, comments that no matter how much it tries, it will never be able to hit him. However, the monster keeps laughing, especially because the target it was aiming at was actually the people inside the walls. Unfortunately, Alka realized too late that he had let his guard down, so he quickly defeats the monster. But all those curses remain active, and their destination was the city of Doramu. Suddenly, inside the walls, all those curses were seen in the sky by the citizens. And it was at that moment that our hero realized he wasn't paying attention to the monster's true goal. After defeating the cursed beast and absorbing the level of the armor's owner, he reaches level 500. However, Ein still comments that the situation is quite bad. After all, the curse used by that monster wasn't a common one, but a so-called demonic curse, which is a special type that is difficult to break. Furthermore, if it isn't treated properly, it will paralyze the entire body, leading the person to death in the end. Ein is sure that many people in Doramu have already been affected by that demonic energy from just moments ago. So Alka asks if there is anyone in the city capable of breaking this curse, to which the boy replies yes. However, even within the Sword of Salvation Guild, there are only 3 people with the power to do so, which left the protagonist desperate since there are so few in such a large city. And Ein then adds that those 3 would be the only ones capable of doing anything. Suddenly, 2 warriors approach running, asking if everything is okay. Quickly, the first of them extends his hand, saying he will break the curse, and right after, the second kneels down to help with his powers as well. The first one calls Mina, saying that although the curse is quite strong, they will be able to break it. Then another person appears, saying they should hurry and do this for everyone since she won't let anyone die. This is Mena, a high-ranking mage from the Sword of Salvation Guild. Faced with all this, Ein analyzes the situation where the 3 most capable people are there, and obviously he becomes quite worried since there won't be any help coming from inside. Despite needing to spread out, Mana can barely handle the power of the curse on a single person, and unfortunately, she realizes it will take some time even if she succeeds. Still, she also knows that adventurers are not the only ones who should save others because they must also care for the people of the city. But suddenly, a beam of light is launched by the protagonist towards Bill, consuming him entirely, to Mina's surprise. The hero knew that if he stood out any more, the Calamity-class adventurers would notice him. However, despite being fully aware of that, he didn't want to be the kind of adventurer who refuses to save others over something so trivial. The level conversion attempt is a success, and the new epic skill is acquired. This is the Golden Curse Break, which releases a golden bullet that disperses all curses. And faced with this, the hero, now at level 350, asks if he did the right thing, to which Ein obviously replies yes. With nothing more to discuss, the protagonist extends his hand to launch a barrage of those from each fingertip. And as simple as it seems, he removes the curse from all the adventurers nearby. Mana naturally can't believe that such a tough curse is being broken so easily. So she asks who the protagonist is, but he replies that they'll talk about that later. After all, there are still many people suffering in Doramu, and about that, he asks if the girl is coming with them or not. Which makes Mina not only accept without thinking, but also shout that she will join because of her pride as the strongest mage. Therefore, Alka seems happy about this too, and so another one joins the hero's group. Already inside the walls, the protagonist notices how disastrous the situation is since the curse is spread throughout the city. In this case, Alka asks them to start working immediately, especially since he is committed to saving the city of Doramu. Alka opens the cistern window and asks the Abyss armor if the preparation is ready. In the weapon request section, he asks for the holy wings, offering the necessary compensation. Additionally, the protagonist accesses the sacred sword, completing the weapon conversion. Meanwhile, at that moment, a blue beam of light flashes in an instant, and from that intimidating aura, Gilly emerges unscathed after a one-sided confrontation on his end despite the level difference. Inevitably, the old man arrives at the gate and comes across the whole situation. Unfortunately, the city had been completely covered by the demonic curse. On the inside, however, Alka is working at full speed to save the people from this cruel fate, and with the sacred sword, he manages to affect an entire block with the power of healing. Mena in turn goes up to a citizen to ask if he is okay, and unbelievably, he responds that he is, which proves that the demonic curse was completely removed, leaving the girl extremely excited. At her side, Ein comments that there are too many people affected by this, so at this pace, no matter how hard the protagonist tries, because time will run out before he can save the entire city. Sooner or later, there will be victims, and Alka does everything he can to encompass as many citizens as possible. However, even after working so hard, only a small part of the city was freed. In this circumstance, the hero asks the armor if there is a way to use his ability over a larger area. The owner's question is received by the system, which offers a solution. The system recommends the use of the weapon converter, which is a function derived from level conversion. It is explained that by paying the level costs, the effect of an epic ability can be amplified using a special weapon. Therefore, a window appears showing the skill the hero has, which combines the holy wings with the curse breaker. To obtain a weapon, the hero must say the following phrase, "Weapon to be obtained," and the activation word is "request weapons." Thus, the protagonist summons his sacred sword and activates the weapon conversion, creating a fusion between the angel wings and the sword. With the golden curse break ability at its full strength, the hero points upward with a command to destroy all curses. In the form of an arrow, sacred energy emerges and, already following the owner's orders, starts moving through the city, stopping at each citizen along the way. This time, the protagonist's power is enough to affect all of Daramu. Because of that, the hero's companions run over to talk to him. Mena asks if that's really a sacred sword. She wants to know if the hero is actually an adventurer or maybe a saint. However, Alka dismisses the second option, presenting himself only as an adventurer who does what he can to save the city, leaving the girl amazed. Anyway, Alka calls Ian, saying he needs to talk to him about something regarding this situation. The hero, who definitely went overboard this time. Alka sounds cold because even though it was for the city's sake, if things continue like this, the whole village will notice him. Then, with maximum desperation, the hero asks Ian what he should do. But in this case, the boy looks at a person who might solve the problem, and without even thinking twice, he suggests asking Mena for help. Sometime later in the city in front of an important headquarters, several people start talking about what happened, and inevitably, they become very excited, waiting for a certain person to come out the door. So at the moment Mena appears, to everyone it's like an angel descending from heaven. One of them can barely hold back his smile when seeing the one who saved Daramu from the demonic curse. Mena is now called the Golden Saint by the citizens, which, even though it's a compliment, leaves the girl so embarrassed that she screams in shame. Some time ago, at the Central Adventurers Management Council, Mena informed them that it was she who dissipated all the curses, just as Alka had asked. So the protagonist thanked her and did not become the hero who saved the city, because Ein's suggestion was made so the mage would receive all the credit for removing the curse. Mena in turn said that falsifying a report for the Central Council wasn't exactly acceptable. Therefore, Alka apologized, but since the boy had indeed saved everyone in the city, Mena was happy to at least be able to repay with this favor since she wanted to do her best to help him. In this case, Ein commented that her words were quite admirable. But changing the subject because of a certain noise, he warned that it seemed like people had come to see the Golden Saint who saved the city. Obviously, Mena screams not to be called that, but Ein says that doing this is very important. To explain himself as the girl is one of the best adventurers in the city, there's nothing strange about her being the savior, and that's why they need to give the strongest possible impression. If they can spread the idea to everyone in Daramu that she is the Golden Saint who saved the city, it will certainly divert attention from Alka. And for this objective, the adventurer announces that they are going to put on a spectacular performance. Mena, in turn, is confused because she hadn't heard anything about performance, and Alka questions whether his friend is sure about this. Then Ein smiles, saying that with the power of the hero, it will be possible to make everyone believe in this story. The girl definitely wasn't expecting something this big, but without caring, Ein simply grabbed her by the arm. And in a quieter place, he told her that he wanted to make her the golden light that saved the city. In this case, Alka would launch a bunch of golden anti-curse projectiles on her, granting her a golden glow for some time. But despite the plan sounding too simple to be real, Mena asks if what they're saying is that she will be the target of the ability. Then the hero apologizes because that's exactly it, while assuring her that it's harmless to humans. In any case, if the girl continues to oppose it, the hero is willing to stop. However, since she had already said she would do her best to help, Mena once again offers herself to do whatever it takes. Still doubtful, the hero asks if she's sure, but as he hears no response, he simply thanks her. And to honor that determination, he says he will do his best, already firing an energy blast that sends the girl's hat flying. And it was in this way, with the hero's golden curse-breaking magic in full swing, that Mena appeared outside to be praised by the population. While watching everything, Ein asks if the hero could move the wings a little more to the left. Alka then tells the boy not to be ridiculous because his powers are not meant to be used like that. Anyway, the hero comments that he is increasingly convinced that Ian is someone who really enjoys playing around. But back to the main focus. With this, the protagonist believes that he will be able to avoid attracting the attention of troublesome adventurers. However, just when he thinks that, Gilly appears, apologizing for the interruption, which leaves both of them not knowing what to say. Without formalities, the old man asks to talk to the hero, and Alka then asks what the reason would be. But Gilly immediately tells him to stop pretending to be innocent because he should already know the meaning of the request. The truth is that the old man wants to talk to the real hero who saved the city of Daramu from the demonic curse. A little worried, the hero asks if the adventurer knows, and after looking at what is happening outside, Gilly comments that he will not deny the methods, since most of Duramu's citizens are focusing on the girl because of the deception. However, the old man states that the adventurers who were at the West Gate will not fall for this. In addition, there were many members of the Sword of Salvation Guild there. In this case, Ein asks the old man not to take their actions as something bad, but Gilly quickly says that he is not there to condemn them, which makes the adventurer curious to know the real reason. Without further mystery, the old man asks if the two were aware of what was happening at the East Gate during the commotion. To better explain, before it became a problem, the old man sent a secret team to take care of it. Then it is revealed that at the same time the Cursed One attacked the West Gate, the East Gate was also attacked by another equivalent army. In this case, the boys ask if the city suffered from this, but Gilly asks the hero to calm down, because he alone drove out the entire army from the East Gate, and no one got hurt. Alka praises him, saying it is expected from the master of the Sword of Salvation Guild, since even with all the city's adventurers being called to the west side, the old man still handled everything alone on the east side. Anyway, Gilly returns to the main point, and since a simultaneous attack occurred on both sides, the old man believes that someone is behind all of this, much to the protagonist's despair. In fact, Ein understands that there are many abnormal things about these attacks. This cursed creature was a monster the boy had never seen before, and driven by curiosity, he asked the adventurers who fought by his side, but none of them knew either. At least the boy believes it is not a beast that lives near the city, and besides, it's also strange that such a huge monster appeared suddenly without anyone seeing it. Therefore, the most likely hypothesis is that someone summoned it already in the region where the attack happened. This means that someone either through an epic ability or magic planned the destruction of the city, and it also means that someone has Daramu as their target. Thus, if someone intends to destroy the city, the old man comments that they will need to strengthen the defenses even further. And that is why he came to the boy, because knowing everything, he definitely needs him to establish his guild in Daramu as quickly as possible and thus be able to work alongside the Sword of Salvation. Ein, in turn, comments that there are many procedures to be followed to establish a guild. However, the old man responds by saying he personally made an agreement with the Central Management Council. Therefore, he only needs two things from the hero. The first is that the boy must fight him personally to prove himself worthy of being a guild master. And the second is just to complete the first difficult task that was given. So Gilly asks if Alka will be able to do it. And obviously, the hero seriously accepts participating in a duel between the two, which for the old man is an excellent answer. At the Central Adventure Council in the combat training area, Gilly announces that they are going to fight. Normally, they use training weapons, but he knows that such weapons cannot measure Alka's true strength. Therefore, real weapons in a real fight with the intent to kill is what the old man is proposing. And to demonstrate his commitment, he unleashes all his power, ordering the boy to come at him with killing intent. Once again, Alka does not oppose, so out of respect for the test, he also unleashes his power, saying that he understands. Thus, with the two standing face to face, Ein raises his arms to give the signal and finally declares the start of the duel, which makes Gilly shoot toward the protagonist's flank like lightning, and attack him seriously, praying that this blade won't be able to kill him. Somehow, our hero manages to defend against the attack because he is now only at level 100, while Gilly reigns with double the power. Just by looking at the level difference between the two, there's no way to win the test, and the boy is sure the old man knows that. Therefore, the purpose of this test is probably not to decide who wins or loses, but to see if he can fight under the conditions he is in now. And if that's the case, the hero decides that he will prove he is capable. Quickly, Alpha advances at high speed, shouting, while the old man remains serious. Thus, the hero attacks at his maximum speed, but the old man not only defends but also knocks the boy's weapon far away. So Alpha sees no other choice but to call the sacred sword through weapon conversion. In an instant, the new weapon almost hits the old man, who dodges just barely, and the hero takes advantage of his opponent's confusion to get close and strike. However, the sacred sword is also knocked far away. Still, Alka remains determined because he still has his knives, and one of them comes very close to hitting the old man until once again, he reads the movements and dodges regardless of the number of attempts. Finally, the hero throws the knife from a distance, and even that is not enough to break through Gilly's defenses. However, the old man soon realizes that it was just a distraction because Alka suddenly disappears from his vision. And then from above, the boy yells that this is what he can do against an opponent with 100 levels of difference, until he falls on top of the adventurer with a powerful blow that causes massive destruction. Ein thinks this is all incredible because regardless of level, the protagonist's skills as an adventurer have improved a lot in this short period. After that strike, Alka gets tired. After all, it's the best he can do at the moment, so he hopes it was enough. However, from the middle of all that cloud of dust, the old man starts to emerge, and even though he's quite injured, he laughs uncontrollably at his situation. After all, if it weren't for the level difference, that attack just now would have been fatal. Something like that is enough for Gilly to recognize Alka's strength as an adventurer, so the protagonist thanks him. But things weren't going to end now because the next test would be the old man's final attack, and Alka would have to try to survive. Inevitably, the ground starts shaking with this bizarre killing intent, and even Ein gets scared because it will be right before his eyes that Gilly will actually use that. The old man uses the epic ability called Demon's Dissent, greatly increasing his power. And then before attacking, Gilly asks the boy to hold out with all his strength because if he doesn't give it his all, he will be exterminated in 15 seconds. At the moment, the protagonist still doesn't know the effects of the epic ability Demon's Dissent. So while he wonders what the effects might be, Ein yells for the boy to be careful, because this is a power that doubles Gilly's level for about 15 seconds. Therefore, shocked by this information, our hero understands that this means the old man's current level is unbelievably in the 400s. At this moment, Gilly's blood is boiling with excitement because it's been a long time since he last used this ability to fight against a companion. Under normal circumstances, the protagonist would have already passed the test with what he has shown so far. But just for 15 more seconds, the old man wants to test how the boy fares against this. In the end, because he exceeded expectations so much, Alka unintentionally awakened a demon inside the old man that desires a fight to the death. Like an instant teleport, Gilly approaches, kicking the boy in the solar plexus, who barely has time to feel pain because in an instant he disappears in a strong beam of light. Thus, the boy crashes into the wall, and to his companion's despair, it doesn't end there as he continues smashing through everything, until he is seen by Minna outside, who asks what is happening. For now, there are still 10 seconds left of the old man's inner demon frenzy, so once again he asks the boy to show whether he can withstand all of this. In that very second, Gilly gets ready, and after taking just one step, he jumps toward the hero. Alka feels his mind confused and can barely remember what he was doing. With 8 seconds remaining, the old man approaches dangerously close to our hero. But at 7 seconds, just as Alka had given up, 2 people called his name. These people were Leela and Mil, who were watching everything from outside the council. With 6 seconds left, Alka starts to remember that they invaded his base not long ago. Besides the 2, now it's Minna's turn to shout the protagonist's name, which makes him remember that Gilly suddenly appeared. With 5 seconds remaining, our hero finally remembers everything. To protect the city, he decided to create a guild, and this conviction brings him back to action. With 4 seconds left, the 2 are close to clashing, so the protagonist attacks with his sword to keep Gilly away. Still, the old man continues approaching, revealing the evil feeling of the demon and rejoicing in facing the strongest of opponents. Thus, Gilly declares that this is the result of his great ambition and his purpose of being. All of this is placed into his final attack, the Black Demon Flash of the leader of the Sword of Salvation Guild. Finally, the protagonist is disarmed again and admits that he can't handle these movements. But if all he has to do is dodge, the boy declares that he has a way for that. Therefore, with his micro-explosion ability, the hero commands the sacred sword to self-destruct. Just as intended, the sword explodes upon meeting the old man's final attack. This slightly reduces the impact, but regardless, the boy is still sent flying until he crashes hard onto the ground. Lying face down, the hero asks the black armor to search for epic abilities that can replace the sword he left behind in the training hall, as well as epic abilities that can repair the Saint's wings, but the system warns that using level conversion now is strongly discouraged. The hero knows this, but he still needs to fight, and for that, he will need his sword. With nothing more to contest, the weapon repair ability is purchased for 90 levels. Then the protagonist requests to recover his weapons with this conversion, which quickly brings back not only the sacred sword, but also his katana. Therefore, now Alka provokes that so-called demon and Gilly to come and attack him because, with these 2 furious blades, he will certainly destroy him. Alka knew that if he could hold on for just a few more seconds, he would get better and believed he could still fight more. However, suddenly he collapsed in front of the old man, already unconscious. And quite understandingly, Gilly ceases attacks because the 15 seconds of the test had already ended. Sometime later, the protagonist wakes up in a panic, shouting about the test, until he realizes that he is at his base when he looks at the bed and everyone around him. Leela is the first to come talk to the protagonist. She says that she went shopping with Mil, and at that moment, the 2 saw him falling from the sky. Therefore, naturally, they were quite worried. And the hero manages to remember the moment their eyes met during the fight. Right after the first girl, Mil appears saying she's happy that Alka is okay, but also comments that they were very shocked. Mena, in turn, didn't expect the 2 to break through the tower wall and appear right above them, so the protagonist apologizes for worrying everyone. Anyway, the girl asked about the test, and about that, the old man immediately says that Alka passed. It is said that when the hero lost consciousness, the effects of Demon's Descent had already worn off. In those 15 seconds where he gave everything he had, no other adventurer had ever survived with a wound that small. So Alka feels very happy, but right when he tries to celebrate, he feels a sharp pain, which makes Aim point out that the old man probably has something else to say, and by free and spontaneous pressure, Gilly decides to speak. Inevitably, he reflected on his actions of letting his blood boil, and for having lost control to his ability, he offers his most sincere apologies. But all of this is because, in the meantime, Ein explained that if something had happened to Alka, it would have been the old man's fault, and since it was the protagonist who truly saved the city, Gilly feels quite ashamed. Anyway, returning to his posture, the old man announces that the protagonist passed the first test. So once he has rested enough, he will receive the second part. Alka asks if the second task has to do with completing a high difficulty mission. And immediately the old man responds yes, saying it is in an underground ruin in the east of Daramu. And this place in particular is popularly known as the Atelier of the Ancient Witch. Minna is surprised to hear that, showing that she seems to know what it is about. Gilly explains that this place used to be the refuge of a powerful witch, but now is a tomb of monsters. In this case, the hero asks what kind of monster is the target of the subjugation, but that is unknown. It is said that in recent days inside the Atelier of the Ancient Witch, an abnormal magical power has been observed. And as a result of this abnormal magic, monsters went crazy and attacked merchants traveling to the city. Until now, the source of this magical power remains a mystery, but it is clear that it is not a natural phenomenon. Based on the intensity of the magic, it is estimated to be a level 300 monster. Obviously, the hero comments on this since it is stronger than the one that appeared in the village. Gilly explains that the ruin itself is very dangerous, so none of the adventurers who went there managed to reach the bottom. But if it is the protagonist, he is confident that he will bring positive results. That's why the old man gives Alka the mission to investigate the Atelier of the Ancient Witch and defeat the monster that is causing this magical disturbance. This is Gilly's task, and finally he asks if the protagonist will be able to do it. In a dark and distant place, a signal sounds, making noise in a library where only one person resides with hands like those of a skeleton. Everything indicates that this is the Witch of the Atelier, and with several noises approaching, she realizes that once again someone else is entering her property. Therefore, typical of a possessive person like her, anger arises along with a deep desire to exterminate all intruders. In the eastern desert of Daramu, the protagonist realizes that they have finally arrived. Along with Ayn and Mina, the group is at the destination indicated by Gilly, at the underground entrance to the atelier of the ancient witch. Sometime later, while the hero picks up some things from the ground, he asks if she is sure she wants to come along. The protagonist speaks of Mill, and obviously she says yes, and she is now a newly certified level 10 adventurer. To be able to help the hero, she got certified as an adventurer by the Central Administrative Council. Regarding the reason why the protagonist left the village, both she and Leela heard it from Ayn, so the girl comments that Alka is a good person. The fact was that he left the village on his own simply because he didn't want to involve other people in a problem. However, now Mill wants to become strong because that's how she believes she can stay by the protagonist's side, which surprises him. Anyway, Alka comments that the atelier of the ancient witch is far too dangerous a place for someone at level 10. Then Mill starts to panic, not understanding why the protagonist is at the same level as her. Inevitably, the hero mentions his absorption ability, but the girl states that she also has an epic ability. Therefore, just like him, she needs to gain experience to level up. And to gain experience, she needs to take on dangerous missions, which the boy understands might be true. But anyway, Mill deeply believes that if she ends up in danger, she will be protected. So the hero simply decides to stop opposing her decision. Interrupting the two's conversation, Ayn asks if the protagonist is ready and receives a positive answer. Thus, the group, now consisting of 4 adventurers, will set off on this mission. In a deeper region of the atelier of the ancient witch, the first layer can be seen. Mena, at level 120, notices by the magical density that this is definitely not a normal place, and the same is felt by Ayn, so he comments that Alka needs to recover his level before the owner of this power appears. With the group's current strength, if a level 300 monster appears, they will be exterminated in an instant. Honestly, Ayn was counting on the chance of finding monsters along the way up to here. However, after the battle with the Cursed One, most of the wild monsters in the area fled. Anyway, at this moment, the first enemy of this underground space appears. It is a level 50 Vanguard robot with hammer hands. Alka gets excited to finally find an enemy since he will be able to recover his power. So Ayn steps forward, saying they will weaken the robot so the hero can drain it. Without wasting time, the monster charges at high speed, and using the weight of its hands, it strikes the ground, creating a crater. Because of this, the hero shouts to the rest of his group, and Ayn simply tells the boy to relax. After all, they are still high-ranking adventurers in Daramu, so something like this is not an opponent for them. Mina positions herself above the robot, preparing a spell and mocks, saying that spinning its arms randomly will hit her. Additionally, with her magic, she destroys the robotic arms of the opponent, which makes this the perfect time for the protagonist to attack and steal the monster's levels for himself. At maximum speed, the protagonist approaches, but the robot still had one last trick up its sleeve. At the last moment, it made its head turn into a hammer, just like its hands. And for our hero, at this rate, there would be no other escape but to be completely crushed. Mill panics, knowing she needs to do something to save the protagonist. So without thinking twice, she draws her dagger and asks her epic ability to give her strength. With the shout, Lightning Fang Quick Step, the girl suddenly appears behind our hero and strikes the robot's hammer head. Alka shouts in great concern because she is defending him, and naturally, due to the level difference, the girl can't pierce the carapace, being knocked far away but falling on top of the hero, who thanks her, recognizing the fact that Mills saved him, making her happy. The hero never expected the monster's head to transform like that, but also praised her powers. The monster, in turn, becomes enraged and jumps at the protagonist, trying to land a hit. However, the hero dodges and mocks, saying that a hammer that big won't be able to hit him. In the end, the protagonist can't deliver the final blow because the level gap is too vast, so he wonders how he should finish off the monster. From behind him, Mina warns that normally a robot should have an energy core under its armor. Then the hero asks how they will manage to get past that armor, and Ayn replies it's easy because they just need to tear it off with brute force. Therefore, without explaining much, the boy simply warns that they are going to get a little wild. The moment the robot tries to attack again, it receives a blow right to the head from Mina, who declares she will support the adventure. Thus, Ayn manages to get close and with his bare hands opens the armor through the cracks Alka made without any trouble, revealing all the weak points. Finally, the robot's central energy core is exposed, and as the monster still manages to move, Ayn yells for the hero to hurry. Understanding the command, Alka charges forward and with his sword stabs right into the core, making it crack and finally shutting down the machine. From this victory, the protagonist receives the corresponding levels, returning to level 60. Alka is a bit impressed to be able to absorb levels from a mechanical puppet. Speaking more precisely, Mina comments that the robot is a magical-type monster that controls the puppet. An automaton can act entirely on its own using magical power as its energy source as well. After all, it is an artificial creature brought to life by magic, which is easier for the protagonist to understand. At this moment, Mill shouts for the group to pay attention because 2 more robots are approaching. But now that the protagonist is back at level 60, he charges forward because he can finally fight properly. Right on the first strike, the boy manages to throw one of the robots onto the second, causing a domino effect. And as the punch is strong enough to cause a crack in one of them, the hero wastes no time piercing the core with one of his daggers. In this way, the level of the owner of the Abyss armor rises to 110. When the second monster tries to attack, the Saint Wings are activated, bringing the sacred sword. Therefore, Alka easily defends himself and states that there is no need for any more tricks. Without any problems, he sends the robot's hammer arms flying and simply destroys it with one attack. Thus, the level of the owner of the armor reaches 160, which is much higher than when he arrived in the cave. The problem was that suddenly a sense of danger appeared because several projectiles were coming his way. Mena had to step in front of the boy to defend him and scolded him, telling him not to let his guard down. Now, a second wave of robots had arrived, and unlike the first, these were greater in number, and much more heavily armed to eliminate the detected hostile life forms. These robots were also level 50, but from a different category called Assault, and as ordered, they began the extermination. With the magical barrier, Mana protected all 4 members of the group. Although each of them individually has low levels, with so many enemies, their power becomes cumulative. Some kind of general signal communicates with the Assault units, reporting that the targets are high level. That's why it is extremely recommended that they stay alert without letting their guard down. In the middle of this chaos, Ein draws attention by pointing to a safe area, and soon they start running down a long corridor without stopping, not even looking back. However, due to the level difference, Milk gets tired before the other adventurers, and because of that, noticing the enemies approaching, the protagonist steps forward so the girl can keep running. Thus, facing his enemies, Alka begins weapon conversion, and with his 2 strongest blades, he starts deflecting the projectiles fired in his direction, not only sending them back, but also cutting several that come close. Alka draws the attention of all the robots and confidently asks if they really believe they can defeat him, just because they have the numerical advantage. This irritates whoever is behind the manipulation of the automatons, so one of them opens its abdominal region. To the hero's surprise, because a huge energy cannon is revealed from inside. Little by little, an enormous amount of power begins to be concentrated in the core, and even without expecting this, the hero remains hopeful, because the moment the beam fires, he manages to dodge, making it in another area, though he has to put in a lot of effort. Then another energy blast almost hits Alka, who hides behind a pillar. Inevitably, all the hiding spots begin to be destroyed just ahead. The group decides to stop running because of what they saw at the next gate. Obviously, when the protagonist catches up to them, he asks why they're standing there since the robots are coming, and if they don't move, they will be caught. However, the answer is simple because, unfortunately, the fact is that they reach a dead end. Alka panics, unable to believe it, and the first robot prepares an attack. But fortunately, Mana, who notices it in advance, creates a barrier just like before. Anyway, the monsters start getting closer and closer to the group, so Mana stands in front to defend everyone with her barrier. But the truth is that she is being overwhelmed. Besides that, the energy cannon in the abdominal region appears only to make things even harder. Mana desperately warns that she won't be able to hold on much longer. Therefore, Alka decides that what he must do is step out and face them all head-on. However, Ein warns that the boy must not do that because with the current level, he won't survive. Thus, the question that remains is exactly what they should do to escape. That is until the protagonist steps on a specific area, activating a purple energy that surrounds all 4. Along with that, several magic circles are created on the ceiling of the hall. Being a high-ranking mage, Mana immediately realizes that this is a magic trap. But before any of them could do anything, the floor collapsed, causing Alka and the others to fall into a pit. While falling, the protagonist realizes that the floor didn't just collapse. This hole was actually made by someone, which makes it part of a trap. Therefore, it becomes clear that the person responsible is pursuing the intruders. Unexpectedly, the assault robots jump into the hole as well, and soon one of them punches the protagonist. However, it is deflected far away, crashing back against the wall. Next, another one of the monsters starts trying to hit the protagonist with projectiles. And the strongest one prepares its energy beam again, coming from the center of his body. Alka can't believe that some of them are still chasing them until now. And in this position, it becomes practically impossible to dodge properly. But it's at this moment that Ein shouts, telling the protagonist to use his free right hand. And before the protagonist understands the command, he already asks Mana to fire her wind magic at him. The girl is shocked that her partner is suggesting this, but she gets an idea and warns that she will launch a big one this time. So she fires a huge wind spell that hits Ein directly, but instead of causing damage, it propels him upward, which allows the boy to reach the hero, and holding his hands, he uses the centrifugal force to launch him toward the monsters. In this way, Ein shouts that he'll leave the rest to the protagonist, and the hero understands, already slicing the first one in half with his sacred sword, which causes an explosion that blinds the other 2 robots. Being above this time, the projectiles come from below. Alka simply tells them to hold still and fires something toward the 2 that pierces them, making those robots also explode right beneath where the hero is. With that, it doesn't take long for a chain reaction to occur, and Alka finally absorbs the powers of the 2, reaching level 360. Therefore, being this strong now, he believes he should be able to defeat the abnormal source of magic in this place. Anyway, Mill warns that they are close to reaching the bottom of the hole. Then Mena comments that it's her time to act, and using wind magic to absorb the impact of the fall, the 3 land calmly. That is, if it weren't for an explosion that came right behind because of Alka. Because since his level rose so quickly, he is temporarily unable to control his powers precisely. Dine, on the other hand, laughs, saying that apparently they no longer need to worry about Alka's power. Anyway, Mill asks what this place is because it seems too dark to see anything. But just as she said that, candles all around the hall lit up. And while the group was trying to understand what was happening, a pile of materials from the ground begins to gather in one spot. And from that, the witch from before appears, mumbling about the intruders. Furthermore, in case anyone wants to know why she wants to kill the intruders, she replies that she needs to do it. But she needs to do it simply because of her sole and exclusive desire to kill. Alka can't believe what he's seeing and asks if it's an automaton. But the moment Ein analyzes the status window, he screams for everyone to be careful, because this is not a normal monster. Anyway, the witch activates her annihilation protocol, switching to Velgadia mode. And with a terrifying laugh, she transformed into a kind of horrifying puppet that rips her own clothes, doubling in size. Without a doubt, Ein realizes that this is the abnormal source of magic in the underground space. However, he never thought it would be 100 levels above the expected. This puppet beast is called Broken Wisdom, and as crazed as it seems to be, it charges with murderous intent toward the hero. 30 years ago, in this same desert location, there was a river with a small patch of vegetation, and in the center of it, an old lady was surprised because there was a basket with a baby inside. So she wondered whether an old witch like her should pick up a baby, because she believed it wouldn't be possible since she had dedicated 80 years of her life in search of the truth about magic, acquiring a great amount of wisdom about magic, but in return, nothing about human life. That's why on this day, she believed that people who reached wisdom were actually fools because they threw everything away just to reach the top of a path. In the end, the witch comments that the baby's parents must have abandoned it for something else as well. And if she hadn't noticed it, the baby would probably have died in the wild, which should have been its fate. But at that moment, the child cried, and the old lady began to think about her convictions, because such a helpless child really couldn't be left like that. Inevitably, being raised by an old witch, the child would be avoided by everyone. But even so, since the baby wished to live, the witch Brigadia offered to be its caretaker. And within a few seconds, she decided that the child's name would be Marimu, making not only the baby smile, but also the old lady. In contrast to this empathetic figure of the witch from the past, the puppet in the present charges forward with bloodlust and tries to exterminate the protagonist for being an intruder, but fortunately, he manages to dodge. Little by little, the monster becomes increasingly insane and carries different auras in each of its fists. Thus, the moment the hero tries to advance, one of these hands activates a fire spell that blocks his path, and without giving the boy time to think, another hand almost hits Alka with a sword slash. All those hands work simultaneously, using everything from magic to sword techniques. Jumping over the hero, the puppet uses one of its hands to create artificial kunai, but Mena appears at the right moment to create a barrier that protects all the group members from the projectiles. In response to this, the monster creates a creature with very sharp teeth using dark magic and breaks the barrier, pushing the mage to her limit. Then the puppet freezes the blade of its sword to attack the group with maximum strength. To stop the monster, Alka asks Ian for help, and even if barely, the two manage to stop the attack. The puppet screams, asking what it means to kill, but the hero tells it to shut up since they were the ones attacked. Mel is frightened because she does not understand what that beast is, and Mena shares the same feeling because regardless of someone's level, a puppet should not be able to use magic like that. While fighting, Ein has a hypothesis to explain what is happening. About 10 years ago, this place was inhabited by an old witch who controlled various types of magic. Ein heard that she died of natural causes, but perhaps she exceeded her life expectancy using magic. And then, according to his intuition, this automaton is not just any monster, but rather the old witch who used to live here in soul or perhaps in spirit. With the strength of the two, they managed to throw the puppet far away, giving them some time to think. Alka asks if the old witch was really that fierce, but Ein replies that no, because back then the residents seemed scared of her. However, there were never any reports of direct harm to anyone. At this moment, the robot starts feeling agonizing pain with a widespread electric short circuit. Then Ein comments that the body of the automaton, into which the soul was transferred, seems to be breaking. In this case, it would be the perfect time to act, but suddenly dozens of ice walls appear, and the robot uses these walls to move at high speed until it gets close enough to Ein for the boy to take back what he said earlier. 18 years ago, in the old witch's workshop during the night, the library was empty, but a house deep in the forest was not. Because there, Marimu was building a robot under the supervision of the witch. Of all things, Brigadia shows herself impressed by the girl's interest in these strange things. But to the girl, this was something logical since with normal magical abilities, she could not defeat the master. Still, Brigadia assured her that if Marimu acquired knowledge, one day she could reach the same level as her. However, the girl found Brigadia's path boring, and that was why she decided to specialize in automatons. Since that time, the witch did not seem interested in it but let her do whatever she wanted. After all, her goddaughter's life should be determined by herself. 10 years ago, with Marimu a bit older, the witch on her deathbed asked the girl not to raise her voice. Marimu was obviously desperate and determined to find a way to transfer her soul into an automaton. She was just one step away from not losing her mother, but that step still seemed far from being taken. Brigadia, in turn, said that it was okay, and that the girl did not need to continue this research for that. After all, the witch's death was natural, but now her disciple would have a future, and she prayed that something wonderful would come to the girl since she had always been a good girl. Back in the present, the puppet advances wildly with the intention of exterminating the intruders. Then the young adventurers retreat to avoid being hit. But the problem was that a certain adventurer could not retreat as quickly as the others. Mill was face to face with a level 400 monster, so the hero panicked the moment an attack was prepared. And without thinking much, he put himself in front of the blow to protect the girl, taking all the damage and being thrown along with Mill across the library floor. Alka struggles to get up, leaving the mage quite worried, and Ai makes a point of not letting her get close. But that was not enough, and as expected, when she approached one of the ice barriers, she received a surprise blow from inside it that hit her directly. Mana flies with the impact, causing great concern in Ain, but now he doesn't have time for that. After all, he becomes the last target for the puppet monster, receiving several new attack attempts every time he dodges. The frequency of the assaults is quite intense, but the monster just swings its arms in a disordered manner. Therefore, the boy believes he can find some way to avoid them, but suddenly a kick comes his way. And since he wasn't expecting that, he is also hit directly, being thrown against a bookshelf. At this pace, the hero who is injured on the ground knows that they will all be eliminated. Therefore, he gets up willing to fight again, which catches the monster's attention. Thus, the two charge at each other, screaming from the strong emotions provoked by the battle. This time, Alcott is the first to manage an attack, but he notices something terrifying about the beast. The puppet created an immense energy and didn't stop even after taking damage. However, for some reason, instead of aiming at the protagonist, it strikes the ground around itself, targeting its own body. A huge blaze then rises around the puppet's body, and from there it emerges with clear damage. But it only serves to intimidate Alka, who realizes that the monster doesn't care what happens to its own body, since even while melting from the heat, it keeps advancing like a mindless beast. Faced with this madness, the hero realizes that disordered attacks won't work, so he needs to pierce the beast directly in its energy core. But about that, he still doesn't know how he's going to do it. While burning, the monster charges at the boy with multiple punches, and even though the monster is so clumsy, it becomes difficult to get close. Besides, at this moment, more of those automatons from before that were chasing the group appear. However, since they are focused on the protagonist, Alka thinks this is a great opportunity because he was already in need of levels. Thus, with just one move, he defeats all the robots that appeared and absorbs their levels, and now reaching level 560. In this way, with a determined look, Alka asks the Abyss armor to find an epic skill that limits the enemy's movements. And so the research is completed, offering the skill Crown's Bind, capable of restraining a single weaker target using black spears for a cost of 150. Once again, the monster prepares to attack, but this time the hero activates the skill. And even though the beast is advancing at high speed, since its level is 400 and Alka's is now 410, he declares that the powerful must be crowned while the weak bow before the presence of the king. Alka shouts Crown's Bind, giving the order for the puppet to stop. And then those black spears emerge from the ground in large numbers, piercing the robot's body until all it can do is scream. 10 years ago, Maremu had completed her final project, and now all that was left was to transfer the master's soul, because she had not yet found a way to do that. But the idea that came was to make it happen using the forbidden technique taught by the witch. And for the girl, even if she was in an automaton body, it would be enough as long as she was alive. Unfortunately, she could no longer stay there either, but all that mattered was that the preparations for the activation of the technique were complete. Thus, when the master's life ended, her soul would automatically be transferred to the automaton. And in this way, the girl said her farewell, saying that even if she was consumed by evil, she hoped that at least the master would find happiness. Back in the present, with screams of anger and despair, the monster tries to move, which inevitably causes its own body to begin being destroyed. However, it had already been proven before that the beast didn't care about itself, and for that reason, it managed to break free from the imprisonment. In this case, the hero summons his skill again, but now watches every reaction of the puppet very carefully. Since that monster does not give up and once again tries to escape, the protagonist needs to reinforce the Crown's Bind again. But meanwhile, all the time, the puppet insists that it needs to exterminate the invader. Because of this, the hero asks why it is so determined to kill them. And for some reason, this question finally makes the robot reflect on whether killing is really its true purpose, until it comes to the conclusion that it is not, but the feeling of losing control inside the puppet is greater than it can handle. Therefore, to the hero's surprise, it destroys some of its own arms in order to free itself, and then charges forward once more, completely crazed, to destroy any form of life that appears in front of it. In this case, the hero sees no other choice but to activate his skill one last time, now piercing the robot's chest. And so finally, the witch's soul remembers that its true purpose was actually just to protect the place where that child would one day return. In any case, now Alka destroys the puppet with a powerful strike, making it fall to its knees. But even in its last moment of life, what remains of the witch's spirit calls out the name of Maremu. Somehow, the protagonist realizes that he has defeated it, but suddenly his attention is drawn to a glowing orb that comes out of the robot's body. That's why the hero wonders what that is, and as quickly as it appears, it flies towards a half-open door. It was a hidden gate that not even Alka had seen before, so he decided to take a look. But first of all, the level absorption skill activated, making all the power of that destroyed machine be transferred to the protagonist's body. His current strength was something Alka had never felt before. However, not everything was just celebration, because the moment the boy's current level was confirmed as 810, he felt a pain that knocked him to the ground. The pain was intense and was probably because of this rapid level absorption. At the same time as he screamed in pain, the protagonist radiated energy more powerful than anything until now. Absorbing such a vast amount of levels all at once caused severe damage to the body and mind of the armor's owner. Therefore, the system suggested the emergency feature called Storage and began waiting for the owner's intention to activate it. But since he wasn't responding, this feature called Storage couldn't be activated. At least that's what should have happened, but the system decided to make an exception this time. And so it temporarily activated an authority to enable the storage, which was then created with a command from the Abyss armor itself. All that power in the protagonist's body brought him to the brink of madness. However, with that command from the system, 400 levels were ordered to enter the storage. This happened with a simple command from the system, making all that power be removed from the center of our hero and taken to a dimensional space inside the armor. After that, Alka falls to the ground, and when he regains consciousness, he asks if it was the armor that saved him, which is answered that after confirming the owner's intention, the new function was activated. And since our hero was almost unconscious, he believes the armor's words. Anyway, Alka asks what this storage actually is. Then it is explained that it is a feature where one can store levels and withdraw them whenever desired. This time, the storage kept 400 levels, which prevented the hero's powers from going out of control. Therefore, now instead of immediately absorbing the levels, the boy can deposit them in the storage. This way, if he uses the feature wisely, he won't stand out in the city. In any case, if the level increases too much, things can get out of control just like what happened now. But it is estimated that this is due to the sudden increase, so by getting used to it, the berserk effect can be avoided. Faced with this, Alka comments that maybe he should train to get used to higher levels. At that moment, the sound of fast footsteps is heard, and soon the entire group comes running to see if the protagonist is okay. Mill is the most worried because she heard a terrible scream, but the hero says he's fine, and more than that, He's happy, since everyone there is safe, which is enough for them to celebrate. By the way, the protagonist mentions that when he defeated the automaton of the old witch, a light similar to a human soul appeared from the wreckage. And about what happened to it afterward, he says that the light disappeared behind the door right ahead. A bit scared, Mel asks if they should check what's happening, and Mena answers yes. Because if that light was the soul of the old witch, the danger might not be over yet. Therefore, the four adventurers set off to uncover the mystery behind the door, and as the strongest in the group, the protagonist places himself in front to open it. However, the sight that everyone finds is that of a sunny place with beautiful vegetation, which even makes the hero doubt whether this is still the same underground space. Ein believes it must be a place created by the magic of the old witch, but even Mena has never seen magic like this before, which was to be expected from the most powerful witch. Mill, in turn, wonders where the human soul went, but soon notices the presence of a house at the far end of the place. What definitely seems to be a suspicious cabin. However, before they could even go there, a hole opened in the roof, and to everyone's surprise, another armed robot appeared in an instant. This robot seriously asks the group to put away their weapons and shows its blade, saying it prefers to avoid unnecessary conflicts. Then, a little confused by this, the protagonist asks the machine to do the same, but it couldn't because the blade was part of its arm. Anyway, the robot explains that it didn't want to be rude to a benefactor. And to explain itself, the machine says that its name is Brigadia, an old witch rejected by the world whose soul was freed by the adventurers. Returning to the introduction, the witch claims to be just an old lady who refuses to die. Then the hero has a brief conversation with her about everything that has happened so far. In the end, the witch apologizes for the commotion caused because that body was out of control. In this case, Mel becomes curious about how this current avatar appeared. Then it is said that it was a prototype automaton, an experimental model, and had been in the warehouse all this time. But apparently, when it was defeated by the hero, another forbidden spell was activated, to the surprise of Mina and the protagonist. About this, it is explained that the name is Forbidden Magic of the 100 rejected by the witch. This is a general term for powerful magic that in the normal magical world would never be practiced. Therefore, the protagonist asks if this magic is really active, and unfortunately, the robot confirms that it is. To be more specific, what was activated was Forbidden Spell number 95, which grants peace to a soul without a body. With this forbidden spell, even if the witch's soul dies inside the workshop, it will automatically find another usable body. Mena, in turn, notices that Brigadia doesn't seem to like surviving with this forbidden magic. Then she asks why the witch simply doesn't undo the spell, but it is said that this is not possible. After all, this forbidden spell can never be undone by a third party. And to explain the misunderstanding that is unfolding, she states that she would never have used such magic in the first place. She also explains that she is merely a victim being targeted by this forbidden magic. In this case, with curiosity taking over the group, Mina asks who cast this spell. And unfortunately, the witch reveals that it was her disciple named Maremu. It seemed that she couldn't accept her death and then used it to cast a spell that distorted even the natural law. In the end, the witch knows very well that her disciple is a fool, and that's why she asks them to forget about her. Because as things are, she will soon meet the girl to resolve this. But it is said that there is still a problematic issue in this matter. The fact was that Maremu did not have the knowledge or ability to use forbidden magic. Therefore, a certain man surely convinced her to do this. And in exchange for teaching her forbidden magic, that man would have her produce combat automatons. Thus, his name was about to be revealed, but suddenly this person appeared to introduce himself as Volma Forden. Shocking our hero, Volma states that magic users despise those who can break the principles of the world. However, forbidden users are in great joy over the fact that he accepted everything that magic can offer. With a bloodthirsty look, he says that from people to his own desires, everything naturally destroys without mercy. Then Volma Forden introduces himself again, but now as a forbidden spell user blessed by the god of evil. Obviously, the witch is left in disbelief that the one responsible for everything is standing right there. Volma was someone consumed by greed and who had no right to step into her territory. That's why Brigadia states that she won't let him escape, and that she will make him regret it. In this way, the witch triggers an emergency command for all the automatons in the region. But upon hearing that the witch is planning to call her robots, the sorcerer asks if she is referring to those metal pieces trapped in his magic, which leaves everyone shocked and Volma in a state of total ecstasy. Then, without any mercy, he destroys all the robots in an instant. And returning to his serious expression, he asks if they should get straight to the main subject. After all, he is there to deal with ending the life of the elder witch Brigadia once and for all. Faced with this intimidation, the witch's expression becomes even more irritated because it seems that the one controlling the forbidden magic is not Maremu, but rather Volma, which the sorcerer himself confirms, saying that the girl merely executed the spell he initiated. In this case, he is the only one who can break it, and in other words, the only one in the world who can kill her. Then Volma vibrates with joy at the witch understanding the situation she is subjected to, and he states, laughing, that under his command she can lose the protection of that forbidden magic. In this way, the sorcerer points his staff and declares that as soon as that tin body breaks, the witch's soul will be lost forever. Brigadia, in turn, asks why the sorcerer only came now to take her life. After all, she can't think of any benefit in killing an old woman like her. At first, when he cast the magic, Volma explains that he really had no intention of killing her. However, when 10 years pass, circumstances changed, and at this moment, he claims to be executing a magnificent plan. Then revealing that soon, plenty of dazzling blood will flow in the metropolitan city in the south of Daramu. This shocks both the hero's group and the old witch. In any case, Volma is doing this because he doesn't want to be stopped by an old woman with a sense of justice. Because in the neighborhood in the city, she is still one of the most powerful witches. Alka finally calls attention by asking if the man can be considered his enemy, and he agrees. That being the case, the protagonist charges to attack, saying that's all he needs to know. This attempt slightly shocks the sorcerer, but he manages to defend himself at the last second. Volma shows that he is impressed, and soon the shock of the blow makes both of them step back. Regardless of the villain's plans, the protagonist states that he is not interested. What if Volma tries to do anything to the people of Daramu? The hero warns that he will not allow it. A confrontation is imminent between the level 500 sorcerer and the level 410 adventurer. However, it was only at this moment that Volma realized who he was dealing with, because he didn't expect to find someone as powerful as the witch there. Naturally, unexpected interferences will hinder the villain's plan, but he enjoys this because it's great that he has discovered the hero's existence there. Since now that he is aware of this unforeseen event, the protagonist is nothing more than a toy, which becomes clear when Alka is thrown away with ease. With the hero lying on the ground, Volma approaches, saying that he doesn't even need to use forbidden magic to kill the boy. But it is at this moment that Ian appears, frustrating this plan because for some reason, the sorcerer had forgotten about the others. Faced with these new opponents, the villain analyzes the situation carefully as he is surrounded, and so Volma understands that he is clearly at a disadvantage despite his high level. Therefore, for now he opens a portal, saying that he will put things in order first. And he admits that he will flee from the confrontation because if he stays there any longer, the blood ritual may be delayed. Alva asks what that is about, but his companions seem to understand and look frightened. In any case, Volma warns that if the boy truly wants to protect Daramu, he should return home quickly, because it is only a matter of time before his subordinates start chaos in the place. In the administrative city in the south of Daramu, like on any other sunny day, people walk around freely. For anyone observing from the outside, it really is a place that conveys a charming peace. However, from the top of one of the buildings, Volma was watching the daily life of the citizens, and he stated that it was a pity because that peace would come to an end today. As soon as a blue-haired boy said goodbye to his friends, he walked into an alley, and consumed by evil energy, he began the first part of the blood ritual, which made Volma laugh to the point of almost hallucinating. Right after the first, several other points of light started appearing around the city. Each location was managed by a subordinate of the sorcerer, with the order to kill everyone. Thus, suddenly, an explosion occurs, and the goal of all this was nothing less than to manifest the evil god on Earth. At this moment, a certain bond that was wrapped around the soul of the old witch broke along with part of her core. Therefore, she felt great pain, falling to her knees and worrying our hero. But she also said not to worry because Volma had already tampered with her curse. So if her body breaks again, she will no longer be able to escape death. In any case, the witch knows that this is normal, and besides that, the effect of the curse is limited within her workshop. In her previous body, there was a carefully recorded command that prohibited her from leaving. But this is a free body, and in this way, she will be able to leave from now on, which will make the curse meaningless. Moreover, the most important thing now is that they should think about the sorcerer's plans. No gets scared when she remembers that Volma said he would send his subordinates to Daramu. And from what the witch knows about the villain, it doesn't seem to be a lie. In this case, Ain suggests they return to Daramu quickly, because they need to stop this coordinated attack. Even so, the place is far from there, and even if they leave now, they won't be able to arrive in time. However, to solve this situation, the witch asks if the adventurers have forgotten who she is, because, as Volma said, even in death, she is still the great ancient sorceress who was once greatly feared. Back in Daramu, the situation is unfortunately already much worse than it was minutes ago. In front of the villain's subordinates, a man fallen to the ground begs for mercy. However, one of those wearing spiral masks and black cloaks approaches with dark magic, and even after begging a lot, that man apparently meets a cruel fate at the hands of the sorcerers, screaming so loudly that even Leela, who was far from the center of the chaos, heard it. When she went outside, she only now noticed that the color of the sky was different. But unfortunately, being curious was her biggest mistake because one of the evil mages appeared, and saying he had found another sacrifice, he began chanting a spell, making the girl cry until she lost her life, because the agony she would feel would play an important role in the manifestation of the evil god. Luckily for the girl, right at that moment, the protagonist appears with a punch that destroys the sorcerer's mask, throwing him against a wall. Alka yells at Leela upon seeing that his spell is approaching, but Mana appeared at the right moment to block it. Even though it's forbidden magic if the person using it is weak, the girl says it won't be that big of a problem. So in front of everyone around, Leela thanks them from the bottom of her heart, making the hero happy that they arrived in time. The witch, in turn, comments that they were right to be worried about Volma. After all, if they had killed her in her atelier, none of them would have been able to get there with teleportation magic. Thus, the hero gives thanks, but the robot simply asks them to skip the formalities. After all, with everything they've been through so far, they can already be considered companions. During this entire disaster, it was common to attack unarmed citizens in an inhumane way. Therefore, Gilly appeared saying that you would never ignore something like this, and without wasting time, cut down 3 of the sorcerer's subordinates, staving that person who previously seemed cornered, which made the citizens seek refuge in the city's guild. So far, the enemies the old man had defeated were between levels 80 and 100, but he knew that with this amount of power, it would be impossible to create such chaos. Therefore, the one responsible appeared, clapping his hands, saying it was expected from the leader of the Sword of Salvation, which obviously made Gilly furious like never before when he realized this was the mastermind behind the attack. But as always, Volma simply feels pleasure in witnessing others' anger. Anyway, he confirms the old man's thoughts, saying that he is the leader of the blood ritual. And since the guild leader seems not to understand, Volma explains that inflicting as much pain as possible on humans and killing them, as well as bringing all the lamentations and curses to flow within the bodies is his goal, because by using an immense amount of blood, it will be possible to summon the forbidden magic that manifests the evil god. Therefore, this is what the blood ritual truly means. Since they're there, the old man asks if it was him who ordered the appearance of the cursed monster as well. But about that, the sorcerer needs to think carefully to remember. For him, it had just been a secondary summoning to test the city's strength. But with a smile, he thanks the old man because now he knows there is is no one there stronger than him. Therefore, this becomes the perfect place to start the blood ritual. Gilly understands the situation and slowly begins to release his power. Thus, with eyes full of energy, he declares that the sorcerer's decision is wrong and activates his epic skill, Demon's Descent. Even with his trump card, Volma mocks him since the old man's level is still below his. So he pulls a weapon from his spatial rift and rivals his own aura, claiming that his power cannot be reached. However, the old man simply comments that it will be 15 more seconds until reinforcements arrive, which obviously Volma does not understand. But he didn't need to understand because at that moment, Alka requests 190 levels for storage. And with the command's authorization, the owner's level rose to the 600s. In this way, Gilly charged forward from the front, and before Volma could realize it, Alka was already behind him, ready to attack. Near the place where everything is happening, Ein says he is angry and cuts down several cultists with great ease. As a justice adventurer, he doesn't want to see anyone else sacrificed, but unfortunately, he doesn't have the power to protect everyone there. That is precisely why the boy is furious with his own inability to resolve the situation. In response, another adventurer yells, telling the boy not to stand still. This is Bill, and in case Ein has the same desire as him, the bald man states that there is no other choice but to fight non-stop to become stronger, which Ein inevitably agrees with, wearing a sincere smile. Thus, the two join forces, each protecting the other's back. And agreeing that the bald man is absolutely right, the adventurers do their part against the sorcerers. Sometime later, Bill asks what happened to that guy in the black armor. Then Ein replies with a hopeful expression that the boy is fighting somewhere far beyond the reach of the two of them at the moment. Back to the protagonist's fight with Volma, the sorcerer is surprised because his stronger than expected attack arrives. And with a shout, our hero signals the old man in the rear, who understands that it is his moment. He doesn't think twice before using his demonic black flash ability, but instead of feeling cornered, Volma opens a wide smile. Then he gives a command to activate Forbidden Technique number 74, ordering it to spread his life to become a guiding function. This command brings all of his subordinates to where he is, and suddenly they begin to emit a powerful aura, which makes Gilly step back and leaves our hero surprised, not understanding what is happening. Without mystery, the sorcerer reveals that this is a forbidden technique that uses the life of devotees as a sacrifice to block any attack. In the end, losing subordinates is obviously bad, but to Volma, being weak is synonymous with being disposable. The sorcerer notices that the protagonist's level has risen a lot in a short period of time, so he realizes that it was probably a mistake to have left him alone. Anyway, the old man doesn't waste the time of his ability and tries to attack in any way possible. With both hands firmly on the sword hilt, Gilly tries to land another of his powerful strikes, but fails to hit anything due to the level gap. Thus, he finally understands how problematic the forbidden technique he used earlier was. However, he also realizes that apparently the sorcerer cannot use them consecutively, which seems to be the case judging by his expression. Therefore, the protagonist charges forward at his maximum speed, hoping to knock out the villain before he can use something like that again. This makes Volma feel the danger and retreat as quickly as he senses it. In this case, the hero asks the old man to cooperate with him so they can defeat the enemy together. And so the two dash forward like a flash of light, replicating the demonic black flash technique together to finally finish off the evil sorcerer who ends up cornered. Quickly, the sorcerer reacts in panic, creating a barrier to contain the attack from the two. Thus, they begin a power struggle to see who will give in first, whether it will be the barrier or the strength of the adventurers. But soon a small crack appears, and right after it, the entire barrier breaks, injuring even Volma with the shards, who not only falls to the ground from the impact, but also crashes into buildings as he is dragged along the ground. Finally, the sorcerer bleeds in this battle and shows that he is quite wounded. However, his personality makes him laugh since he enjoys blood in any circumstance. Anyway, the hero points his sword at the villain and together with Gilly, warns that as long as they are there, Volma will not be able to do anything else. Once again, the sorcerer cannot hold back his uncontrollable laughter. After all, he meticulously prepared until now, but never expected to be stopped by these irregularities. In particular, Volma admitted that he greatly underestimated the abilities of the adventurers, but regardless of that, there still wasn't enough blood. And since he could no longer take the lives of the citizens due to his condition, Volma decided to move on to Plan B, a plan that was not perfect and required gathering the rest of his subordinates, much to the adventurer's surprise. However, Volma does this because he has no other choice but to collect the blood in another way. With eyes exuding magic, Volma chants another forbidden technique, and as he begins to declare what he will offer, hundreds of energy swords appear above his subordinates. That is because this is the scream that leads to death, and with the sacrifice of the sorcerers, Volma will be able to proceed with the plan. Thus, these swords release a shockwave that drives the sorcerers insane. And while their former leader trembles with pleasure, they are all brutally eliminated so that the ritual can be successful. Obviously, the adventurers feel disgusted by this situation, but Alka understands that Volma is compensating for the lack of blood with the lives of his own companions. Even so, for the sorcerer, it is still not enough, but he accepts not being too greedy. Therefore, he makes a gesture to summon his staff through telepathy. Then the protagonist charges forward, saying he won't let him do whatever he wants any longer. However, Volma replies that the hero should have finished him off when he had the chance. After all, now the sorcerer has enough vitality to dodge, and the long-awaited moment begins. From the suffering to the screams and even the blood of everyone, it will now become one in this ritual. Then with the command, all the fluids of the citizens begin floating toward the staff. And before either Alka or Gilly could do anything, all that blood started gathering around the crystal, which made Volma even more excited about the progress of his plan. Once again, he laughed and removed his cloak with enthusiasm, offering his own blood for the manifestation of the summoning. After all, if it could be useful now, then all his wounds would not be in vain. With that, a light blossomed inside the staff's crystal, and like a flower, it projected outward, generating an unimaginable amount of energy. This stone was something Volma had been searching for a long time, and as a result of all this chaos, its name was Crystal of Sad Blood. With such power in hand, the sorcerer declares that he has no more use for this city, and threatens that he will return to the altar to activate the largest forbidden technique ever performed in history, to then finally bring back the evil god that will descend to Earth. Alpha charges with all of his strength, and their swords clash in a heated confrontation. The hero yells furiously, questioning what Volma plans to do by summoning this god. Then the sorcerer responds that when it is summoned through a forbidden technique, the god becomes obligated to serve the summoner. In other words, the immense power of the divine being will belong entirely to him. With nothing more to say, Volma retreats, warning that he will withdraw for now. And so, as the protagonist collapses to the ground, the sorcerer gets farther and farther away. However, before leaving, due to the determined look in the hero's eyes, he warns that the hero is free to pursue him. But he also makes it clear that if he chooses to do so, he will understand the reason for this warning. Anyway, with a snap of his fingers, Volma practically disappears. Alka thinks he won't forget this, but the sorcerer had already escaped, and by the fate of the light, the old man believed that the place where Volma was heading would indeed be suitable for a large-scale forbidden technique. Therefore, without wasting time, the old man informs the protagonist that he has identified the enemy's fortress, much to the hero's surprise. It's quickly revealed that it is in the far western desert of Daramu, in a sacred cemetery used to consecrate ancestral spirits. But currently this place is abandoned and is called the Mausoleum of the Palms. Gilly admits that they couldn't defeat the evil sorcerer on their own. Therefore, he would like to immediately form a pursuit force. However, the old man knows that leaving this solely to the Sword of Salvation Guild will be impossible. After all, the protagonist's current level is 500, which far exceeds the human limit of 250. In this case, with the hero's current power against Volma, who seems to be in the 600s, Gilly comments that he wouldn't stand a chance if they fought together. Therefore, the old man asks if the protagonist has completed the extermination request, to which Alka responds yes. From now on, Gilly announces that he will approve the establishment of the boys' guild, and with that, he should be able to receive broad support from the Central Management Council. Additionally, the old man swears that the Sword of Salvation will fight alongside him with everything they have, and even if the sorcerer's subordinates block the path, they will cut them into pieces to clear the way for Alka, who will be responsible for defeating the leader. In this way, the protagonist receives all the commands and accepts them immediately. By the way, the old man asks if the hero has already decided on a name for the guild, and apparently the protagonist wasn't thinking about that despite it being something very basic. At the moment, Alka says that nothing comes to mind, so the old man asks to make a suggestion. To explain the name he is going to choose, Gilly states that Alka is their beacon of hope, and he comments that probably the boys' companions have already seen the glow of hope in the hero in black armor. But not only the current companions, but also those who will join in the future. Therefore, with all the context given so far, the name the old man decided for the new guild was Black Star Hope. Somewhere far away, Marimu reflects while sitting with a lantern lit, and when she looks forward, a bit discouraged, there is a huge mutant wolf with robotic parts that seems to be her ally. At this moment, the news that a group of adventurers is approaching had already arrived, so she decided to get up, and although she wasn't in the mood for it, she made it clear that they should exterminate all the curious ones immediately. With short steps, a certain person gets closer and closer to the altar. Now that the long journey to manifest the evil god is in its final stretch, today will mark his destiny. Balma takes out the crystal of sad blood that he obtained, which will be the sacrifice. And with that, all he needs is a summoner, which will be himself, to carry out the ritual. The only issue is that it will take some time for the full manifestation. But regarding that, Marimu informs that they are already prepared to hold back the adventurers so Volma can focus on the forbidden technique. Thus, he shouts that everything is wonderful and admits that bringing the girl to his side was the right decision. Then, without further delay, the crystal is placed on top of the altar. And with an explosion of energy, Volma remains nearby to witness the moment when the evil god will change the world. Sometime later, in wagons near the region where the commotion is happening, the new guild Black Star of Hope is present. By the way, Mill comments that they managed to borrow a beautiful carriage. But since the guild request was approved, the hero replies that they can receive support from the central administration without any problems. Additionally, An comments that Black Star of Hope is a good name, and feeling that it was a subtle hint, the hero apologizes for not asking for the others' opinions. Mena insists that it's not a problem and that they will continue following the guild leader, which makes Alka cheer up again. However, Ein also reminds her that the girl is still part of the Sword of Salvation, which makes her embarrassed. At that moment, the boy responsible for driving the carriage warns that he can already see the destination. Then everyone gets scared because even though they are still a bit far from Volma's fortress, the Mausoleum of the Palms emits an intense evil aura. It is said that if it weren't for the barrier created by forbidden techniques, they could have used teleportation magic. Even the witch admits that the defenses on the inside are formidable. Quite frightened, Nil screams for her companions to pay attention because suddenly a group of masked sorcerer subordinates appears. Obviously, the protagonist is surprised, and before they could take any action, all those mages prepared a forbidden spell together, launching it toward the front carriages, which were completely destroyed. With this initiative from the enemies, someone shouted, warning the Sword of Salvation that they were under attack. Therefore, the necessary thing to do now was to go out and help. However, Ein insisted on stopping the hero because there were also capable adventurers on the other side. And knowing this, the boy thought it was better to let them handle that problem. Thus, while a battle occurred further behind, the carriages that were not stopped continued toward the mausoleum. There, where everyone disembarked, Gilly, who was leading the Sword of Salvation, asked if everyone was alright. And since the protagonist replied yes, they could forget about that problem for now, to focus all efforts on stopping the ritual and defeating Volma. All the adventurers from both guilds rushed into the place, and as soon as they entered, the protagonist was slightly shocked by the atmosphere of the place. Gilly asked our hero to be careful because it will be difficult to know where the enemy will attack from. Then both the old man and the protagonist draw their weapons, waiting for something to to happen. Fortunately, or unfortunately, it didn't have to wait long because soon some subordinates appeared from above, throwing knives. Thus, Alka deflects everything that comes his way and Gilly alerts them about the enemy's attack, giving the order for the first group to deal with this problem while the second follows him. After all, he doesn't want the protagonist to stop since the mission they are fulfilling is to take him to Volma. Therefore, the old man acts so that the hero can focus only on what is ahead. While the adventurers of the first group deal with the sorcerer's defensive line, the main group proceeds toward the center of the mausoleum. Ein comments to the protagonist about the forbidden manifestation technique, which must already be in the activation phase. At this moment, it is clear that they don't have time to deal with every enemy, so the boy asks to be left behind if necessary. Obviously, Alka is against this suggestion, but Ein assures him that they will win, so the hero decides to trust him. In the end, the boy comments that each one will handle the problem they are capable of, and soon another wave of evil sorcerers appears. But this time, not only in front, since Mill notices some at the rear as well. To deal with this, Bill takes charge of the enemies in the rear and along with an auxiliary group, charges with a slash, while mocking that just standing around like the sorcerers is very boring. Back with the protagonist group, he states that he will stay in front and jumps, defeating 3 enemies at once. Then the system notifies that it has detected interference from forbidden techniques in the area. In any case, the hero shouts that it doesn't matter because his level is more than enough. Thus, he informs the old man that the path is open, and quickly the last warriors of the front line keep running, until suddenly Gilly dodges as monstrous arms break through the wall beside him, and from the hole that forms, a powerful beast seems to be peeking through. The mystery doesn't last long because a cursed creature soon reveals itself. Naturally, the old man notices that this one is much smaller than the last one he faced, but suddenly a crack appears on the ground, and from it, several other smaller cursed creatures join the fight. Alka turns to help Gilly, but the adventurer himself asks the protagonist to keep moving forward, because, as he said a moment ago, they will definitely protect the hero's back. Finally, at the center of the place, Mina comments that she feels an unpleasant magical energy, and when the group stops running, it is already possible to see the deepest part just ahead, so the protagonist leads the group to proceed quickly, until suddenly, the paws of a monster stomp on the ground. That wolf with robotic parts belonging to Maremu appeared to defend the last barrier before Volma. It was a female called Blue Iron Belliette, and along with her, the witch's disciple presented herself. For at this moment, the manifestation of the evil god was almost complete, and the girl was determined not to let any of the adventurers interfere. The roar of that animal sends a strong gust of wind toward Alka, who thinks about the girl's name. In any case, in the face of all this, he declares that it doesn't matter who she is because stopping Volma is the priority. Maremu, in turn, is quite confident despite the beast being level 450. She heard that the protagonist is at level 600, which is highly abnormal. Inevitably, she admits that she cannot fight directly since she is a technique, but she also states that she has already found a way to hinder him. With another roar, a magic circle is activated beneath the two, and a mechanism in the beast triggers a sensory energy beam that sweeps across the entire area. Mana is curious to know what kind of attack this is, and Ein doesn't feel anything different, but the protagonist feels heavy. Because of that, the girl turns to leave, saying that the rest depends on Belliette. After all, he is the strongest among her creations and the masterpiece of an automaton. As soon as the monster approaches to attack, the protagonist defends himself using both of his swords. And since the level difference between the two is 150, he believes there's no chance of losing. Thus, the boy lands a very powerful strike, and with both swords in hand, he attacks with a precise double slash. But soon he realizes that even with a cut on the beast's chest, it simply attacks again, launching the boy far away. And with the mechanism activated in its paws, Belliette runs at high speed, leaving even the hero confused by the animal's swiftness. In an instant, a laser forms in the automaton's mouth next to the protagonist, and it fires directly at Alka's chest, causing an explosion that destroys all the pillars around and leaves Mill worried. Fortunately, the protagonist was fine thanks to his swords, which were sacrificed in the process. However, there was still something strange because Alka was sure that this last attack should have been effective, and considering the level difference between the enemy and him, it would be natural for the fight to have ended there. Therefore, the hero needs to understand why that beast is still moving. Maremu, who watches everything from the second floor, mocks the hero's situation, but she made sure to explain that the answer was in this energy field that Belliette created. After all, it wouldn't make any difference, since while the boy was within this space, even if his level was higher, he would be brought down to a level lower than the beast. And besides that, Belliette's entire construction was based on the most resistant metals that existed. Therefore, if the battle continued, sooner or later the protagonist would be the first to wear out. But before that, the girl also reminded him that while they were talking, time was still running. And this made Alka practically fall into despair, so the boy reforged his weapons and charged at the beast. Belliette is a level 450 monster, and the hero is the only one capable of fighting her there. However, if he continued fighting like this, it would definitely be too late. In any case, the beast attacked with full force once again. And in this critical situation, Alka would have to think of something to get out of this mess. At that moment, the witch's automaton appeared at the best possible time with a kick that sent that monster flying. And even though it was something quite difficult, Brigadia asked to be in charge of handling this situation, which left Maremu speechless, but the witch added that the hero had something more important to do. Obviously, Alka is surprised that Brigadia managed to send Belliette flying so easily. Then the witch informed him that she forced herself a bit to gain the necessary power to fight against this wolf. In any case, she stated that the hero only needed to know what she had already said. And the moment Alka tried to question it, he turned around and was surprised because all he saw were the determined looks of his companions. And faced with something like that, Ein didn't even need to finish his sentence because the protagonist said they should do whatever was possible. Ein then felt proud that the hero remembered what he had said. And so Alka ran off to defeat Volma with the expectations of his companions, since now he was once again the star of hope.